Hey everyone, welcome back to Mr.X Files. If you're new here, this is the place where we dive into the mysteries that keep you up at night. Whether you're here to relax, fall asleep, or spiral into an existential crisis at 3 in the morning, you're in the right place. Drop a comment, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is for you. And yeah, if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. Alright, let's get into it. What I'm about to tell you isn't some conspiracy theory or an urban legend you scroll past. It's my truth. A confession, really, from someone who was there, who helped build it, and who watched everything it unleashed. My name? It doesn't matter anymore. They made sure of that. But this story, this has to be heard before it's too late. They called it a clearance upgrade, a quiet promotion, a change of office. But it wasn't a promotion. It was the start of something that broke my mind. The Nevada facility didn't have an official name. It existed in that blurry space between acknowledgement and denial, somewhere caught between classified government secrets and the black world that lies beyond even that. When you drove up to the gate, there were no signs, no logos, no hint of what was hidden behind the razor wire and concrete barriers. Just a faded metal post with the number 847. I remember the heat, July 2011, the asphalt radiating waves that made the air shimmer as I walked from my rental car toward the security checkpoint. The sun was brutal. But inside the facility, the air was cool, almost cold, a sharp contrast to the desert oven outside. Everything was beige and white. The walls, the floors, the ceiling tiles that hummed with the constant drone of overworked air conditioning. The guards were strange too. No insignias on their black uniforms, no name tags or badges, nothing to tell you who they were or who they worked for. They spoke in clipped professional tones that said nothing. I'd been in intelligence for 12 years by then, mostly NSA signals analysis. But this place felt different. The silence was heavier, thicker. The way people looked at me, just a fraction too long, just a bit too sharp, made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. Then she appeared, Dr. Matthews. I hadn't noticed her come out of the elevator. She was in her 50s, grey hair, pulled tight into a severe bun, white lab coat over plain civilian clothes, no name tag, no credentials. "I'm your orientation supervisor," she said. "Please follow me." The elevator ride down was unnerving. It lasted far longer than it should have, passing floor after floor. Basement 1, basement 2, basement 3. But the numbers kept climbing. Basement 7, basement 9, finally, basement 12. When the doors opened with a soft pneumatic hiss, her voice echoed down the long corridor. "Welcome to sub-level 12. This is where you'll be working." The hallway stretched endlessly in both directions, lined with doors without windows or any markings. Just alphanumeric codes that meant nothing to me. SL11247A, SL2103C. The lighting was different here, not the harsh fluorescent glare of the upper floors, but something softer, almost amber. It reminded me of a sunset, which felt impossible 12 floors underground. We stopped at door 1288B. She placed her palm on a scanner, entered a code I couldn't see, and the door clicked open. "Your office," she said, motioning inside. It wasn't really an office. It was a strange hybrid between a control room and a library. One wall was lined with banks of computer monitors, all dark. The opposite wall was covered with filing cabinets locked tight with mechanisms I'd never seen before. Electronic, but with mechanical parts that clicked and shifted silently as I watched. In the center was a desk with a single terminal, its screen glowing a soft blue. "Your job title is Non-Linear Pattern Analyst," she continued, closing the door behind us. "Your security clearance has been upgraded to TSSCI with additional compartmentalized access. You'll be working with data that requires special interpretation." I sat down at the desk. The chair adjusted automatically to my height and posture. The terminal flickered on, showing a login screen already filled with my credentials. "What kind of data?" I asked. She studied me for a long moment, then said, Temporal probability matrices, event cascade analysis, what some might call predictive intelligence, fortune-telling science. Her voice was steady, almost proud. Very advanced science. Tomorrow, you'll meet your team and see the source of the data you'll be analyzing. For now, I need you to read these orientation materials, all of them, tonight. She handed me a tablet loaded with documents, hundreds of pages of technical specifications, theoretical physics papers, and something called the Looking Glass Protocol. The classification markings were unlike anything I'd seen before. Compartments within compartments, marked Orion, black glass, and that was just the beginning. The tablet glowed softly in the dim room as I scrolled through endless pages filled with strange symbols, geometric shapes, codes, and classifications that meant nothing to me at first. One more thing, Dr. Matthews had said before leaving, her voice low and serious as she reached for the door handle. Some of the material, you'll see, can cause psychological side effects, vivid dreams, temporal displacement sensations, even occasional prophetic experiences. If you notice anything unusual, report it immediately. We have strict protocols. After she left, I was alone in that strange office, surrounded by the steady hum of machines and the oppressive weight of 12 floors of earth and concrete, pressing down above me. I opened the tablet again and started reading. Within an hour, I understood exactly why they had those protocols. Project Looking Glass wasn't just about predicting the future. It was about literally seeing it. What it revealed was enough to keep some of the most powerful people awake at night. They never called it a time machine. Instead, it was called a quantum convergence lens. The chamber itself was on sub-level 15, accessed through a different elevator that required 2 key cards to be swiped simultaneously. When the doors hissed open, I stepped into a place that shattered every idea I'd ever had about government facilities. It wasn't sterile or clinical, it was almost cathedral-like. The room was circular, about 50 feet across, with a domed ceiling that disappeared into darkness far above. The walls were lined with panels that seemed to ripple and shift, like liquid metal catching your eye only when you weren't looking directly at them. But the real centerpiece was in the middle of the room. There, 3 concentric rings hovered, about 3 feet off the floor. Each ring was roughly 20 feet across, slowly rotating, each ring moving independently. The outer ring was a dark, unfamiliar metal, covered in symbols that were neither quite hieroglyphics nor math, but something else entirely. The middle ring was translucent, like pure crystal or glass, pulsing with an internal light that shifted through colors I couldn't name. The innermost ring was the most unsettling. It appeared made of the same liquid metal as the wall panels, constantly shifting and reconfiguring itself as if alive. Suspended, in the very center, floating between the inner ring and the floor, was a black glass sphere about the size of a beach ball. It reflected everything, yet revealed nothing. When I looked straight at it, I saw my own face, distorted and multiplied, in 1,000 fragmented images, but in my peripheral vision, it showed other things, other places, other times. Impressive, isn't it? Dr. Sarah Chen appeared at my side. Introduced as the project's lead physicist, she was a woman in her 30s, recruited from CERN's Temporal Mechanics Division, a division that, according to official records, didn't exist. How does it work? I asked, unable to tear my eyes from the sphere. That's complicated, she said. The rings create a localized temporal field, a bubble where time flows differently than in the rest of the universe. The sphere is the focal point, where quantum probability waves collapse into observable patterns. It doesn't show the future directly. Instead, it shows probability matrices, possible outcomes that collapse into the future. And yes, it actually works. She led me to an observation deck overlooking the chamber through reinforced glass. Technicians bustled below, making final preparations for what she called an observation session. 3 years ago, we predicted the earthquake in Japan, she said. Not just that it would happen, but the exact magnitude precise location and timing of the tsunami waves. 6 months ago, we identified the exact building where Osama bin Laden was hiding. 2 weeks ago, we saw the financial markers that preceded the European debt crisis. As I absorbed this, a figure in a white jumpsuit entered the chamber and moved toward the device. From where I stood, I couldn't tell if the person was a man or a woman. They placed their hands on sensors embedded in the floor near the central sphere. "Who operates it?" I asked. "Remote viewers," Dr. Chen said quietly. "Psychics, if you prefer that term. People with natural precognitive abilities amplified by the device. The military has researched and trained remote viewers since the 1970s. Project Looking Glass is the culmination of that work." As she spoke, the rings began to spin faster, slowly at first, then gaining speed, as if waking up from a long slumber. The colors in the middle ring began shifting faster, swirling like a storm trapped inside crystal. Then, the black sphere at the center started to hum, a deep, low harmonic tone that I didn't hear with my ears but felt deep in my bones, as if the sound was vibrating through my very marrow. The operator in the chamber, eyes closed in intense focus, fixed their mind on a particular question or a single point in time. Dr. Chen's voice broke the heavy silence. The device amplifies their consciousness, allowing them to perceive quantum probability patterns, things that usually exist beyond our ability to see or measure. She gestured toward the banks of monitors that surrounded the observation deck. "The data is processed and converted into reports that analysts like you interpret." As she spoke, streams of data began flowing across the screens, not images or videos, but complex mathematical patterns, probability cascades, topographical maps of events instead of places. The shifting shapes were dizzying, but some of the patterns looked familiar from my earlier orientation. "These are temporal probability matrices," she said. "It's like watching waves collapse into a single point." Later, I would tell people about that moment, though never where I had seen it, that no matter what input we changed, that one point never shifted. But back then, I didn't understand what I was seeing. I thought Project Looking Glass was just an advanced way to predict probable outcomes based on current trends and hidden variables. I believed we were playing the ultimate intelligence game, seeing around corners, anticipating enemy moves, preventing disasters before they happened. I didn't realize we were witnessing the death of free will. Suddenly, the operator's body stiffened. Their hands pressed flat against the sensors embedded in the floor. The rings began spinning faster, blurring into a chaotic whirl of motion and light. The black sphere pulsed fiercely, and in its strange reflections, I swear I saw brief flashes, images too real to ignore, but impossible to place. A city burning, crowds marching through the streets, a sky filled with lights that were neither stars nor planes. Then, just as suddenly as it started, everything stopped. The rings slowed back to their lazy rotation. The sphere went dark, and the operator collapsed. Medical teams rushed in immediately, moving quickly to tend to the fallen figure. Dr. Chen turned to me, her face pale. "That was a convergence reading," she said softly. "They're becoming more frequent and more intense." "What's a convergence reading?" I asked, heart pounding. She looked back toward the chamber where the medical team was helping the operator to their feet. "It's when all possible futures collapse into one inevitable outcome. We've been seeing them more often lately. All pointing to the same time, the same event." "What event?" I pressed. Dr. Chen was silent for a long moment, eyes fixed on the monitors as the data stream slowed to a trickle. "We don't know yet," she said quietly, "but it's coming. And according to every model, every probability matrix, every convergence reading we've run, there's nothing we can do to stop it." My job was to find the patterns. Every day, I sifted through hundreds of pages of data, from looking glass operations, probability matrices, temporal correlation analyses, event cascade projections, My task was to compare these theoretical future scenarios with the real world as it unfolded, creating feedback loops to improve the device's accuracy. The work was unlike anything I'd done in traditional intelligence analysis. Instead of tracking known actors or probable behaviors, I was tracking the behavior of reality itself, how small changes rippled forward through time, which events were fixed points that couldn't be altered, and which were fluid, changeable. Within weeks, I began to see what Dr. Chen meant. Certain events appeared in every probability matrix, no matter what variables we tweaked. They were like gravitational centers in the flow of time. Everything else bent and shifted around them, but these points remained constant. The 2008 financial crisis was one of those fixed points. No matter what economic policies we modeled, what regulatory changes we simulated, or which individual actors we removed from the equation, the crisis happened. The details might shift. Sometimes it began with housing, sometimes derivatives, sometimes sovereign debt. But the core event was immutable. It's not that we can't change the future, explained Dr. Richard Voss, my supervisor and a 20-year veteran of what he called unconventional intelligence operations. It felt like some parts of the future were more solid than others, like concrete that's already set, compared to concrete still wet and shifting beneath your feet. We were sitting in his cramped office on sub-level 13, staring at the latest batch of convergence readings sprawled across the table. The data was sharpening, focusing in a way it hadn't before. Where earlier reports showed dozens of possible futures stretching decades ahead, now everything was collapsing into a narrow, pointed shape, a tight cone of certainty centered around a specific window, 2012 to 2016. I pointed to the printouts, tracing the temporal focus markers with my finger. Look, everything's zeroing in on this 4-year span. Not everything, Dr. Voss corrected softly, his eyes fixed on the screen. There's one event, just one, that every probability matrix agrees on. It's unavoidable. I frowned. What is it? The early readings had been murky, filled with vague warnings about a consciousness shift, information cascade, and paradigm collapse. But as 2011 gave way to 2012, the picture grew clearer and far more unsettling. Mass demonstrations erupted worldwide. Governments wobbled under pressure. The mainstream media started losing control, and decentralized networks began dominating the flow of information. Economies strained under unprecedented stress. Beneath it all, the remote viewers kept describing something deeper, an awakening, a fundamental change in human consciousness itself. I scribbled in my classified journal one night, "They don't fear war. What terrifies them is awakening, something beyond control." What made it worse wasn't just the predictions themselves, it was how damn accurate they were proving to be. The Arab Spring, which exploded in early 2011, matched the social uprising, patterns we'd been tracking since 2009. The Occupy movement, WikiLeaks, the rise of Anonymous. Everything had been laid out by the device long before it happened. Here's what really shook the higher-ups. When we tried to model interventions, to stop or change these events, the probabilities refused to budge. We'd try removing key figures, censoring information leaks, even orchestrating fake attacks to distract the public. Nothing altered the convergence. It was like trying to rewrite history itself. From the quantum field's perspective, these events have already occurred, Dr. Chen explained during one of our weekly briefings. We're not predicting the future, we're observing it. By mid-2012, the remote viewing sessions weren't predictions anymore. They'd become intelligence reports from the future. Operators would emerge from their sessions with details about events months or even years ahead, and every tiny detail was spot on. One operator, Patricia Wells, a former CIA remote viewer, described witnessing the moment when the sleepers wake up. She was vague on specifics, but the biological data recorded during her session was unlike anything we'd seen. Her brain showed patterns usually linked to near-death experiences or deep mystical states. When she came out, tears streamed down her face. It's beautiful, she whispered over and over. It's terrible and beautiful. Nothing will ever be the same. That session changed everything. It added a new dimension to our analysis. Consciousness itself was now a measurable factor in temporal probability. The device wasn't just showing political or economic futures anymore. It was revealing how human awareness was evolving on a scale beyond any individual. Dr. Voss brought in experts from the military's most secret consciousness research, programs, neuroscientists who had worked on projects with code names like Grill Flame and Stargate, physicists studying the overlap of quantum mechanics and cognition, philosophers who had spent lifetimes pondering time and free will. Their conclusion was unanimous and terrifying. What we were witnessing wasn't just external events lining up. It was the very structure of human consciousness reaching a breaking point, a phase transition from one way of being to another. Think of it like water turning into steam, explained Dr. Margaret Torres, a quantum consciousness researcher, her voice steady, but her eyes distant. It's the same substance, but completely transformed. She'd been brought in from a program so secretive, so classified, that I never even learned its real name. Dr. Torres continued, her voice calm, but heavy with meaning. Below the boiling point, water is just water. But once it boils, it becomes something completely different. Steam, with properties you don't expect. Consciousness appears to be going through a similar kind of transformation, and there's nothing we can do to stop it. She gestured to the convergence data spread across the conference table, hundreds of pages filled with probability matrices, all pointing to the same critical window in time. You can't stop water from boiling if you keep adding heat. And the heat, in this case, seems to be information itself. She paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. The explosion of global communication, data processing, artificial intelligence, social networking, everything is turning up the temperature of our collective human consciousness. Eventually, it reaches that boiling point. Then what? I leaned forward, breath caught, waiting for the answer. Then, she said quietly, we find out what steam looks like when it's made of human awareness instead of water. The implications were staggering. If the device was right, if this convergence was inevitable, then everything we thought we knew about control, about planning, about the ability of powerful institutions to shape the future was wrong. We weren't watching the future unfold. We were watching it crystallize, locking itself into an unavoidable present. But the most disturbing part was still coming. As 2012 went on, and the convergence readings grew even more intense, we began to notice something else, something that would eventually force the shutdown of Project Looking Glass and scatter everyone involved into obscurity. The device wasn't just observing the future was observing us. Around that time, something shifted in the data. The multiple probability branches, the many possible futures we'd tracked, began to collapse, merging into a single, inevitable timeline, where before we'd seen dozens of paths branching out like a tree, now every path led to the same outcome. The official term was temporal convergence, but the remote viewers had their own way of putting it. The point where choice ends. When Dr. Elena Vasquez joined our team in October 2012, she was recruited from a deep black program so secret it officially didn't exist. Something involving the intersection of consciousness research and exotic physics. On her first day, she took one look at our convergence data and went pale. How long have you been seeing single-path projections? She asked. About 8 months, Dr. Voss replied. She frowned. Why? Because single-path projection shouldn't be possible. The quantum field doesn't work that way. Multiple probabilities should exist until collapse at the last moment. What you're showing me suggests that collapse has already happened. She spread our latest readings across the conference table. Dozens of sessions from different operators, all pointing to the same narrow cone of probability focused on the same point in time. This isn't the future crystallizing, she said. This is the past reaching forward. Something has already happened that makes all these outcomes inevitable. I shook my head. That's impossible. The future can't affect the past. Dr. Vasquez gave a grim smile. Not in classical? Physics. But consciousness isn't classical. Quantum mechanics tells us observation affects reality. If something in the future becomes conscious enough, aware enough, it might be able to observe backward through time, collapsing probability states in the past. The idea was mind-bending, but it finally explained something that had puzzled us for months. Why all our intervention models failed. We weren't trying to change the future. We were trying to change something already determined by that future. Dr. Chen brought in more physicists to help, including Dr. James Hartwell, who had worked on temporal mechanics at a top-secret facility in Colorado. According to him, the place studied things that went beyond our normal understanding of time itself. It hadn't happened yet, but the data was already pointing to something far more unsettling than anything Dr. Vasquez had uncovered. After poring over weeks of convergence readings, Dr. Chen looked up, eyes heavy with exhaustion. "You're looking at a temporal locked loop," he said quietly. "A cause-effect loop where the effect actually comes before the cause." I blinked. "Wait, you mean something in our focus period between 2012 and 2016 is creating enough conscious observation to retroactively fix its own chances of happening?" "Exactly." Chen's voice was calm, but carried an edge of disbelief. Consciousness might not just be bound to time the way we think. If human awareness evolves far enough, it could start to observe across time, not just space. And as we know from quantum mechanics, observation shapes reality. The room grew heavy with silence as the weight of his words settled in. We weren't just watching human consciousness grow. We were watching it become strong enough to rewrite the very rules of cause and effect. By early 2013, the convergence data was getting more precise. No longer just a vague 4-year window, but a sharp sequence of events. A chain reaction that would rewrite the course of human civilization. The operators were struggling. Patricia Wells, our top remote viewer, had begun experiencing what she called temporal bleeding, memories of events that hadn't happened yet. Vivid dreams so real she could barely tell if she was awake or asleep. Moments when she felt trapped between timelines, unsure which reality she belonged to. "It's getting stronger," she told me after one intense session, her voice trembling. "Whatever's coming, it's pulling at us, like a tide dragging me into the future. Sometimes I feel like I'm already there, looking back at this moment, wondering how blind we all were." What she produced in those sessions wasn't the usual data, no probability charts or event maps. Instead, she delivered personal accounts, stories from the future, first-person experiences describing a world that felt eerily familiar, yet utterly transformed. "The old systems won't." "Hold," she said during debriefings, her tone distant, almost like she was channeling someone else. "Money, government, media, religion, they'll still be around, but they won't mean the same thing anymore. People will see through them, beyond them. It'll be like waking up from a dream you never realized you were dreaming, Doctor." Voss grew worried. Our protocols assumed exposure to future data would be brief and controlled, but these convergence sessions demanded longer, deeper dives into the temporal fields. The team was losing their grip on reality. "We're losing objectivity," he warned during a classified briefing with the facility's command. "This data isn't just showing us the future, it's changing us." The military officials didn't like hearing that. Project Looking Glass was supposed to give the US an unbeatable strategic edge, not expose a future where traditional power meant nothing. General Morrison, the military liaison, frowned. "So you're telling us this convergence means the old ways of governing won't work anymore?" "Not impossible," Dr. Chen said carefully, "but ineffective. If consciousness evolves like the data shows, people will start seeing through deception, manipulation, the whole system built on keeping them in the dark. Control through ignorance will collapse." The room fell silent. These were men and women who built their careers on managing information, controlling stories, keeping society predictable and stable. The idea that everything they'd fought to maintain might simply become irrelevant was a threat deeper than any foreign enemy, and there was nothing we could do about it. To stop it, Dr. Voss stared at the convergence data once again, the same endless stream of numbers and probability, patterns we'd been studying for months, the slow but unstoppable tightening of possibilities, until only one outcome remained: certainty. "We've tried everything," he said quietly during a late-night meeting. "Economic pressure, media manipulation, technological blackouts, even targeted removal of key individuals." He shook his head, exhaustion plain on his face. "The probability matrices don't change. This isn't something we can stop with the usual tools." "So, what do you suggest?" someone finally asked, the room falling into a heavy silence. Outside, the Nevada desert stretched under a vast sky that gave nothing away, no hint of the world-changing secrets buried beneath its sands. "Adaptation," Dr. Chen said at last, her voice steady but shadowed with uncertainty. "If the future is inevitable, then our only choice is to prepare for it. Understand what's coming, and find ways to maintain some stability through the chaos." But even as she spoke, I could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes. The convergence readings weren't just pointing toward change. They were showing the collapse of the world as we knew it, and no protocol existed for that. By 2014, Project Looking Glass had become something its creators never imagined, a window into the demise of their own power. The data was clearer now. It showed a transformation period marked by economic turmoil that no traditional policy could fix, political unrest immune to propaganda, and social movements rising seemingly from nowhere, leaderless, uncontainable. Most unsettling were the readings about people. They weren't just reacting differently, they were becoming fundamentally different, more aware, more connected, able to see past the artificial divides and stage conflicts that had kept civilization orderly for centuries. "It's not just that they'll know the truth," Patricia Wells said after one session, her hands trembling. "They'll be capable of knowing the truth. Their consciousness will expand so much that deception won't just be hard, it'll be impossible." The implications shook the project's oversight committee to its core. A society where lies couldn't take root, where manipulation was useless, where people saw reality directly, without filters from media or propaganda. Such a society would be utterly ungovernable by any traditional method. Dr. Vasquez brought in more data, making the picture even more grim. The convergence wasn't limited to human minds. It spread into artificial intelligence, quantum computing, and what she called hybrid organic digital consciousness. The technological singularity and this consciousness evolution, they're one and the same event, she explained, during what would become our final technical briefing. Artificial intelligence would reach human-level awareness at the very moment human awareness transcended its current limits. They'd meet in the middle and merge into something completely new, and it was definitely going to happen. She showed me the latest probability charts. Where we'd once seen branching paths, now there was only one line, a straight, unyielding thread of fate, as inevitable as gravity. Every model showed the same future. Every remote viewing session confirmed it. Every quantum probability analysis pointed to the same temporal focal point. From the view of space-time, it wasn't going to happen. It had already happened. We were just living through the chain of events leading up to it. The military officials, desperate for control, made what seemed like the only logical choice. If they couldn't stop the convergence, they'd try to manage it. Task forces were created to track individuals likely to play major roles in this transformation. Contingency plans were drafted for managing the chaotic transition. Resources were stockpiled to keep essential government functions running, even if the old power structures crumbled, but none of it worked. The convergence readings showed every attempt at intervention failing, every control measure falling flat, every contingency plan becoming useless against the sheer magnitude of this evolving consciousness. It was like trying to stop an earthquake by moving the furniture. Dr. Chen, sat quietly during one of our increasingly tense planning sessions. She rubbed her temples, her voice low but steady. The forces we're dealing with, they're far beyond anything we can control. Her eyes flicked to the data spread across the table, a sea of numbers and probabilities that only seemed to tighten around us like a noose. By late 2014, something strange began to happen, something that would change everything. The operators started disappearing. It began with Patricia Wells. I remember that Monday morning clearly. She showed up like any other day, went through her usual convergence reading without a hint of worry. But after that, she was just gone. Not dead, not missing in any way we could explain. The security cameras caught her walking calmly to her car in the parking lot, but the car never left. When we found it, the keys were still in the ignition, her ID card on the seat, but Patricia was nowhere to be found. Dr. Vasquez called it temporal displacement. He suggested that prolonged exposure to future consciousness might be causing the operators to slip between timelines. They're not disappearing, he said quietly. They're moving to when they belong. 2 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Chen didn't come in to work. Her apartment was untouched, no sign she'd ever lived there. Bills were unpaid but untouched, her car still parked in the facility lot. No calls, no messages, no trace anywhere. Then, it became a pattern. Remote viewers, physicists, consciousness researchers, anyone deeply involved with analyzing convergence data started vanishing. Not in a panic or struggle, but silently, like they were being pulled into the very future. They were studying. General Morrison called an emergency meeting in December 2014. Less than half the original team remained. The cold conference room was heavy with tension as he delivered the grim news. Project Looking Glass is terminated effective immediately, he said, voice firm. All research materials will be secured, equipment deactivated, personnel reassigned. But the convergence is still coming, Dr. Voss protested, his frustration clear. We're only 2 years from the focal point. Don't we want to know what's coming? General Morrison's face hardened. We know enough. This project is a threat to national security. We can't afford to lose more personnel to theoretical futures. The shutdown took 3 grueling weeks. The device was carefully dismantled, its parts scattered across various secure locations. The quantum resonance chamber was sealed behind lead and concrete, then buried beneath 50 feet of Nevada sand. Documents were shredded, fragmented, no one piece enough to rebuild the whole. Still, some of us suspected it was too late. The convergence readings had been clear. The information wanted to be free. Knowledge of this coming transformation would slip out through channels we couldn't track or control. On my last day in Sublevel 12, as I packed my things, I found a folded note tucked inside one of my classified journals. The handwriting was unmistakably Patricia's, but the words were strange, almost like they were written by someone else. The machine didn't just see the future, it created a connection to it. Now, the future is pulling us home. Don't try to resist. You'll know when it's time. I kept that note. I still keep it, even after moving 6 times since leaving the facility, changing my name twice, trying to vanish into the noise of civilian life. Because sometimes late at night I can feel it, the pull she wrote about, a gentle but relentless tug towards something both utterly strange and painfully familiar. Toward a time and place where everything I learned at Project Looking Glass finally makes sense. The official story was simple enough. I was just a statistical modeler working on defense projects. My clearance was downgraded, my non-disclosure agreements extended, and I was reassigned to a boring desk job analyzing routine intelligence in Virginia. But you don't witness something like that and just go back to a normal life. You don't forget the future. The first few months were hell. I'd wake up expecting to see the probability matrices, the convergence charts, the endless streams of data from a device that was supposedly buried beneath the Nevada desert. But instead, all I had was silence and shadows. Instead, I found myself staring at satellite images of missile sites and decoding intercepted conversations between perfectly normal people. people who had no idea their entire understanding of reality was about to crumble. The work felt strange, almost unreal, like studying the social behavior of ants while knowing someone was about to pour concrete over their entire colony. These intelligence reports on foreign governments, terrorist groups, what did they really matter if human consciousness was on the brink of evolving beyond such crude forms of control? I tried to focus on the new assignments, but the convergence data kept creeping into my mind. I'd catch myself, without thinking, running probability calculations for everyday things, traffic patterns, stock market shifts, searching for those subtle signs that showed the future was already locked in. Then, the little things started to show up. News events unfolded exactly as our models had predicted. Social movements ignited right on schedule. Economic indicators cascaded just as the convergence matrices forecasted. The 2016 election was the most chilling. Every major twist, the primaries, the foreign interference, the electoral college results, even when key revelations dropped, matched the data from years before. It felt like watching a movie I'd seen before, but this time I was inside the story. But it wasn't just the accuracy that disturbed me. It was how people reacted. Something had shifted in the way individuals absorbed information, how communities formed, how collective choices emerged from what once looked like chaos. People became harder to manipulate. Traditional propaganda lost its grip. Authority figures found themselves questioned more and with sharper minds. Social media, despite all efforts to control and monetize it, kept creating unexpected links between strangers who should have stayed disconnected. It was subtle, slow, but if you paid attention, you could see it clearly. Consciousness was evolving. I started keeping a private journal, notes I couldn't share at work. Strange signs appeared everywhere. Ordinary people showing flashes of precognition. News stories resolving through collective insight rather than old-fashioned decisions. Political and economic systems struggling as more people simply tuned them out. The old systems won't hold, Patricia Wells had warned in those last sessions. People will see through them, around them, beyond them. By 2018, I was seeing exactly that, not suddenly or loudly, but like a slow sunrise creeping over the horizon, until suddenly it was full daylight, and you couldn't even remember what darkness looked like. Then, the strangest part. References to Project Looking Glass started appearing where they shouldn't. On conspiracy forums, yes, but also in academic papers about consciousness, in theoretical physics journals, even in popular media. The information was fragmented and often tangled with disinformation. But the core ideas were spreading. Worse still were the symbols. The geometric patterns that had covered the device's outer ring began popping up everywhere, in graffiti, corporate logos, art installations across the globe. When I tracked down the artists and designers, none of them knew where the symbols came from. They said they just had to create them, like the patterns were surfacing from some deep, collective part of the human mind. I dreamed about those patterns for weeks. One street artist in Detroit told me, when I finally found him, it was the same pattern over and over. I had to paint it, had to get it out of my head. The pattern was identical to the symbols on Looking Glass's outer ring. Symbols classified beyond top secret, locked away in places that officially didn't exist, buried under concrete and sand deep in the Nevada desert. Back in 2019, things started to get strange. I began having what Patricia Wells once called temporal bleeding dreams. At first, they felt like just weird, vivid dreams, but soon they became something more. Moments where reality blurred, where déjà vu didn't just flicker, but stretched on for hours. It wasn't just the dreams. I'd have conversations with people who swore they'd never met me before, yet they talked like we'd been friends for years. But the worst were the phone calls, always late at night, always from numbers that didn't exist. When I tried calling back, the line would be dead. Sometimes the voice on the other end was Patricia Wells. Other times, it was Dr. Chen. Occasionally, it was someone I didn't recognize, but their tone was oddly familiar, like they knew me better than I knew myself. It's starting, they'd say. Can you feel it? The old world is dissolving. The new one is almost here. After I hung up, I'd check my call logs. Nothing. No record of incoming calls. But their words echoed in my head for days, sometimes weeks, louder than any part of my day-to-day life. By 2020, the convergence, the thing we'd been tracking for years, was impossible to ignore. The global pandemic hit, followed by economic chaos and social upheaval. Everything matched the strange patterns we'd seen in the looking glass. Data. But it wasn't just the events themselves. It was how people reacted. Communities started organizing themselves without any centralized authority. Information spread faster than governments could control. People connected across cultures, borders, beliefs, breaking down old hierarchies that had held society together for thousands of years. I sat at my desk in Virginia, filing reports on conventional intelligence matters, all the while watching this seismic shift in human consciousness happening just outside my office window. The irony was brutal. I was one of the few who understood what was really happening, yet I was stuck in a system blind to it. Then, late in 2020, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a single sheet of paper, scribbled with coordinates in Nevada, and a date, December 21st, 2020, the winter solstice. The ancient Mayans had marked this day as the end of one world and the start of another. The handwriting was unmistakably mine, but I had no memory of writing it. I took leave from my job, citing personal reasons. My supervisor seemed almost relieved. I'd become difficult, asking about projects I wasn't cleared for, chasing leads that led nowhere. They wanted me to move on. The coordinates led me to a remote part of the Nevada desert, about 40 miles from where the Looking Glass facility once stood. There was nothing there. No buildings, no roads, just sand, scrub brush, and a sky so clear it felt infinite. I arrived at sunset on December 21st, parking next to what looked like a surveyor's marker, a small metal post stuck in the hard, cracked earth. As the sun slipped behind the mountains, I realized I wasn't alone. They emerged from the shadows, like memories becoming real. Patricia Wells, looking exactly as she had the day she disappeared from the facility. Dr. Chen, Dr. Vasquez. The other remote viewers and researchers who vanished during the project's final months. They formed a circle around the marker, waiting. You felt it too, Patricia said as I stepped closer. Her voice had that same distant, almost hollow tone I remembered from her last sessions, like she was speaking from somewhere far away. The pull, the call to come home. Where have you been? I asked, breath catching. When? Dr. Chen corrected gently. We've been when we belong, in the convergence point, looking back at the time when none of us truly understood what we were seeing. The surveyor's marker began to glow softly, a warm amber light, the exact color I remembered from sublevel 12. The sand around it shifted, revealing the faint outline of something buried beneath. That device was never really destroyed, Dr. Vasquez explained quietly. How do you destroy something that exists outside linear time? The physical parts? Yes, they were scattered, but the quantum resonance field, that became part of us, part of everyone. As Patricia spoke, the object buried beneath the sand began to rise. It wasn't the massive, imposing chamber I'd remembered from the facility, but something smaller, sleek, refined. A single ring, about 6 feet across, slowly rotating. It cast shifting patterns of light and shadow that seemed to stretch beyond the space it physically occupied. This is what it was always meant to become, Patricia said, her voice calm but filled with quiet certainty. Not a machine controlled by human consciousness, but human consciousness itself operating as a machine. We were never separate from it. We've always been part of the same quantum system. In that moment, everything clicked. I understood why I'd been pulled here, why all of us had been summoned back to this empty stretch of desert. The convergence point wasn't just a date on some calendar, it was a moment when the artificial boundaries between observer and observed between consciousness and reality finally fell away. The future we saw, I said, staring at the glowing ring. It's happening now. It's always been happening. Dr. Chen nodded slowly. Time isn't linear, at least not from the limited perspective of human consciousness. From a quantum point of view, all moments exist at once. The convergence we witnessed was our awareness expanding, enough to see that truth. The ring rotated faster, and patterns I'd studied for years, probability matrices from Looking Glass, started to reveal their true nature. They weren't forecasts of events, but maps of consciousness itself, diagrams showing how awareness moves through the quantum field of possibility. What happens now? I asked. Patricia smiled, and for the first time since her disappearance, she looked fully present, alive, real. Now, you choose, she said. You can go back to your desk job, file your reports, pretend none of this matters, and live in the old world until it finally dissolves around you. Or you step into the new one, help others understand what's coming, become a bridge between what was and what will be. The ring pulsed with light, and in its glow, I saw the future we'd tracked for so long, not as abstract charts or distant possibilities, but as lived experience. A world where consciousness had grown beyond secrecy, beyond deception, beyond the artificial limits that trapped civilization in endless cycles of conflict and control. It wasn't a perfect world. There were still struggles, still pain, still growth and change. But it was a world where those challenges were met by beings who could perceive reality directly, who could communicate honestly, cooperate freely, without coercion. It was beautiful, it was terrifying, it was inevitable. I stepped into the ring. The shift wasn't dramatic. No blinding light, no feeling of moving through time or space. One moment, I was standing in that Nevada desert with my old colleagues. The next, I was here. Though here and when no longer made sense. Time moved differently when you were conscious of all possibilities at once. Past, present, and future were accessible, overlapping dimensions of a single eternal moment. I could see my life at Looking Glass, years of analysis, growing awareness, as clearly as I could see the world that emerged from the convergence point. But I'm speaking to you now from your time, your perspective, because the bridge between worlds still needs building. There are still people trapped in old patterns, those who believe in linear time, separate selves, and the need for external authority to maintain order. You don't need to believe me. The convergence doesn't depend on belief. It depends on the evolution of consciousness itself, whether we understand it or not. But understanding helps. Awareness eases the transition, and there are things you should know about what's coming. First, the changes you're seeing, the political upheavals, economic instability, the collapse of old institutions. They're not random. They're all part of the consciousness evolution we tracked at Looking Glass. Old systems that thrived on keeping people unaware are breaking down as awareness expands. Second, you're not powerless. The convergence readings showed that individual consciousness plays a crucial role. I'm speaking to you now from your time and your perspective, because the bridge between our worlds, it still needs to be built. There are still so many people who see reality through old filters, people who think time is just a straight line, that we're all separate beings, and that we need some authority outside ourselves to keep everything in order. You don't have to believe me. This isn't about belief. The convergence doesn't depend on it. It's tied to something deeper, the evolution of consciousness. And that happens whether we understand it or not. But understanding helps. Awareness softens the shock of it. And there are things you need to know about what's already unfolding. First, the chaos you're seeing in the world. It's not random. The political unrest, the unstable economies, the collapse of old systems. None of it is by chance. These are the signs we saw back when we were using Looking Glass. They're signals of something bigger, the breaking apart of systems that only worked by keeping people in the dark. As collective awareness grows, those systems simply can't hold together anymore. Second, you're not powerless in all of this. One of the most important things the convergence readings showed was how vital individual consciousness is to the overall shift. Every person who begins to wake up, who starts to see beyond these rigid beliefs about time and identity, helps ease the transition for everyone else. You're not just an observer, you're part of the unfolding. Third, the future. It's not some far-off event. It's already here. Not metaphorically, but in a very real way. It exists alongside what you call the present, the skills we trained our remote viewers to develop, seeing beyond time, sensing distant events. Those aren't magic. They're latent human abilities. Natural ones. They emerge as consciousness evolves. I know how this all sounds. Believe me, I really do. 5 years ago, I would have rolled my eyes and called this a delusion. A paranoid fantasy from someone who'd spent too much time buried in old, redacted files and conspiracy theories. But I've seen the data. I've watched probability lines collapse into certainty. I've lived moments that didn't make sense, until I realized I wasn't supposed to understand them the old way. And now, I've started seeing the same signs in others. Symbols showing up in the strangest places. Dreams that feel more vivid, more true than real life. Moments of connection with total strangers. Deep, impossible understanding without a single word. And the growing suspicion that what we're told is happening doesn't line up with what we're actually experiencing. These aren't random, they're symptoms. Proof that the boundary between your personal mind and something larger, something collective, is thinning. If you've had experiences like these, you're not alone. You're not losing your grip. On the contrary, you're finally starting to see. You're becoming more sane than this world ever taught you was possible. We learned one thing for sure at Looking Glass. The convergence cannot be stopped. We ran every simulation. It's happening, but it can be understood. And that understanding, it's the difference between terror and awe, between being dragged into something you fear and stepping into something you've chosen, with open eyes and a steady heart. They said the convergence couldn't be stopped. Maybe they were right. But understanding it, that's everything. I'm telling you this now because the old world is fading. A new one is rising. And there are still people who need to hear this, who need to know they're not imagining it, that they're not crazy, that they're not alone. Those secret government programs, the underground bases, the strange tech, they were just the setup. The real story is what's happening to you right now as you hear these words. Because the machine didn't just see the future, it linked to it. That link, it's alive now. It's spreading from person to person, moment by moment, through your thoughts, through your awareness, through the web of human consciousness itself. You may have already felt it. Small things, easy to brush off. Coincidences that feel too loaded with meaning. Dreams that gave you knowledge you had no way of knowing. Those strange moments of clarity, when you suddenly understand something, even though you can't explain. Why? That's not your imagination. That's your consciousness touching the same field we tapped into during Project Looking Glass. That quantum field, once thought to be accessible only through expensive tech and remote viewing protocols, is now becoming available to anyone whose awareness has evolved enough to tune in. The remote viewers we worked with, they weren't born special. They weren't chosen by genetics or fate. They just learned to listen deeply, to pay attention. You can too. You already are. They weren't special, not in any superhuman way. They were just people whose minds had broken through the artificial limits most of us accept as normal. And what we came to realize, what truly shook us, was that those limits, they're not hardwired, they're learned, which means they can be unlearned. Every time you listen to that quiet voice inside you instead of parroting what the experts say, you're widening the edges of your consciousness. Every time you notice strange patterns that conventional logic says shouldn't exist, you're brushing against the quantum field. And when you act on a gut feeling that came from somewhere beyond thought, from that deeper, almost silent part of you, you're aligning yourself with the convergence. That's why they shut Project Looking Glass down. Not because it failed, because it succeeded. Too well. It gave them a glimpse of a future they couldn't control. A future where their structures of authority no longer worked. A world where people didn't need to be governed from the outside because they had awakened something stronger on the inside. They tried to erase it, hide the tech, scatter the research, silence anyone who'd seen too much. But it didn't matter, because the real breakthrough wasn't the machine. It wasn't the spinning rings or the quantum resonance chambers. It was us. It was the awareness of the operators, the consciousness of the observers. And that is something you can't burn or bury. You can't classify human awareness. You can't put a black budget on intuition or redact the quiet certainty that comes from touching the truth directly. So if you've ever had dreams whispering things that haven't happened yet, if your sense of time stutters sometimes, just a second missing, like the tape skipped. If you've ever known something you shouldn't know, something you never learned, then maybe, just maybe, you're already part of this. Because the machine didn't just see events, it saw people, it saw you. It saw this exact moment. Someone like me, who used to work in the shadows, speaking plainly to someone like you. Someone whose mind is finally ready to accept a truth that doesn't fit inside anyone's narrative or protocol. It saw you reading these words or hearing this story and choosing to trust the changes inside you more than the voices insisting nothing's changed. Choosing to believe that the bridge between what was and what can be is already under your feet. The convergence isn't on its way. It's not next year or next decade. It's now. It always has been. It's just been waiting. For minds like yours. For enough of us to wake up and see it. Welcome to the future. Welcome home. Tonight's story is called Project Selene. A conspiracy thriller woven from static-laced archive tapes, forgotten reels, and the fraying mind of a man who stumbled into something no one was meant to find. A different kind of moon landing story. We'll follow Nolan Price, not a hero, not some CIA agent, just a soft-spoken technician with a sharp eye. A man who catalogued old footage for Arcadia Aerospace Solutions, a quiet contractor handling satellite data, weather patterns, and other boring stuff. Until one box changed everything. Inside, unlabeled VHS cassettes, reels of dusty 16mm film, and a folder stamped with a redacted name, all marked Project Selene. Our story begins under a punishing Texas sun. Nolan stands outside a long-forgotten government facility, cinder block walls, cracked asphalt under his boots. In one hand, a folded letter. In the other, a digital key, card. He hesitates. Something in his chest tightens. A warning maybe, but curiosity pulls harder. Inside, stale air, the faint scent of decaying paper, and the low, familiar hum of servers still running for no one. What Nolan finds in those reels will shift everything he thinks he knows about 1969. Stage lights where there should have been stars, audio cues, repeated countdowns, calls for retakes, and always, the watchers. Men who never show their faces, only silhouettes caught briefly on mirrored glass. Nolan can't shake the feeling they're still watching now. As the footage unravels, so does Nolan. Is it all a hoax, a psychological test buried in a data center? Or has he found proof of something much darker, evidence that humanity's greatest achievement was meticulously filmed under studio lights? The line between fact and fiction bends, and someone wants to make sure he never straightens it. So, settle in. Dim the lights. Let the hush of reel-to-reel projectors and the flicker of grainy film take you back. Back to the moment where a single stray frame cracked the illusion wide open. This is fiction, or so we say, but sometimes asking what if is all it takes to open a door no one wanted touched. And behind that door, Project Selene. They'd found something strange, references to old NASA film reels hidden away in a sealed corner of a cold, war-era facility. The letter Nolan received was formal, vague, and urgent. It said he'd been selected to digitize the reels for historical preservation. The pay was unusually high, uncomfortably high in fact. Nolan adjusted the strap of his worn backpack and stood in front of a weathered steel door. A single guard in a faded uniform gave him a silent nod and waved him in. It was as if they'd been expecting him for days. The moment he stepped inside, the air changed, stale and thick with the scent of old cardboard, dust, and decaying film stock. The lights above buzzed and flickered, casting a sickly glow over endless rows of metal shelves stacked with NASA-labeled boxes. Some boxes were water-damaged, others slashed or torn open, their contents barely intact. This wasn't entirely unfamiliar. NASA had a reputation for misplacing important materials, missing footage from rocket tests, telemetry data gone without explanation, even rumors about lost Apollo tapes. But this place, this secrecy, it didn't feel like bureaucratic clumsiness. It felt intentional. A woman in a neatly pressed grey suit approached. Her tone was clipped and efficient. "Madison Harlow, I'm the liaison for Arcadia. Follow me." Without another word, she led him down a narrow corridor into a cramped side room. It had been hastily converted into a makeshift editing suite. Dust-covered gear sat awkwardly on folding tables. A battered 16mm projector, a spool rewinder, a digital capture interface. Several reels had already been stacked on a plastic crate. Apollo 11 RAW, Apollo 12 AVA, Saturn telemetry hole, and one with a curious handwritten label, Celine B footage. "Your job is straightforward," Madison said flatly. "Transfer these to high-resolution digital. Note any anomalies or degradation. No commentary, no copies, no leaks. Understood." Her eyes lingered on his face like she was measuring his integrity. Nolan nodded. "Understood. I've done sensitive projects before." She handed him a passkey, a single-page instruction sheet for the alarm system, and before leaving, added, "We want this done quickly. You're on a tight schedule." Once alone, Nolan got to work. Over the next couple of days, he settled into a rhythm. He spooled up reel after reel, carefully feeding them through the scanner, watching grainy footage come to life on the small preview monitor. Most of it was what he expected: mission logs, rocket launches, astronaut training sequences. The audio was often faint or distorted, with static-filled voices from ground control echoing over decades-old static. It was mesmerizing in its own way. The rumble of rocket boosters, the calm voices of astronauts running checklists. Despite the degradation, the history still shone through. It was a shame these tapes had been left to rot in storage. Then came day 3. One of the reels was labeled Apollo 11 Stage B, Take 3. Nolan paused. Take 3? NASA reels didn't usually use film terminology like that. Normally, the labels were mission days, telemetry codes, or internal IDs. Curious, he loaded it into the projector. The reel flickered to life, showing what looked like a lunar surface set. 2 suited figures hopped through artificial grey dust. Then, a voice off-screen. Positions and action. The astronauts continued moving. One tripped slightly, and there was a faint laugh from someone off-camera. Another voice cut in, more direct. "Cut. We'll reset. Reflections too bright on the visor." Nolan blinked, leaning in closer. This wasn't normal EVA footage. It looked like a film set. He could see the harsh glare of lighting rigs at the top edge of the frame, barely cropped out. The sky, flat black, looked like a painted backdrop. In the corner, wires swayed gently, like rigging cables. He rewound the reel and watched again, slower. There, a man crouching behind an artificial crater, holding a boom mic. His stomach tightened. The date code on the reel read 71, but the first moonwalk was broadcast live in 1969. Maybe it was a training simulation? NASA did have staged environments for practicing landings and EVAs, but the clapperboard, the direction, the clearly scripted movements, it felt more like a movie production than a rehearsal. Still, he flagged it as an anomaly in his log and continued working. The next few reels returned to normal. Launch telemetry, Capsule camera feeds, audio from mission control. The usual. He tried to push the strange reel out of his mind. Maybe it was some B-roll NASA shot for promotional footage. It wouldn't be the first time agencies stage things for PR. But that night, lying in a musty motel room, the clip kept, replaying in his head. NASA's training footage was always labelled clearly. This one wasn't. And the secrecy? Why all the hush-hush if it was just a simulation? The next morning, he came back early, drawn by a nagging feeling. He reached for a battered canister labelled Selene B. The reel began with a colour bar test pattern, the kind NASA used in the 70s. Then it cut abruptly, no transition, to what looked like behind-the-scenes footage. Several men in dark suits stood around a set that resembled the lunar module. A man in a short-sleeved white shirt read from a printed script. Lunar surface continuity, camera feed. Approach angle must stay consistent for broadcast. Nolan's pulse quickened. They weren't rehearsing, they were coordinating. This wasn't training footage, it was a production. "We need to make sure the horizon line matches the predicted lens angle," said one of the men, his voice firm and calculating. Another man, older, wearing thick-rimmed glasses, nodded with deliberate seriousness. "If we don't fake it right," he said, "we fail. Understood?" Nolan's breath caught in his throat. This wasn't just training footage. They weren't rehearsing for safety or preparing for contingencies. They were talking about deception, deliberate, careful deception. On tape, these men were discussing how to fool a global audience. They debated camera placements that would obscure the edges of the stage and how to simulate lunar gravity with an overhead rig. Then came the line that made Nolan's skin crawl. The public must see only the broadcast feed from the designated channel. His heart thumped. He stopped the reel, set it aside carefully, and wiped the sweat off his forehead. This wasn't just a historical curiosity, it was possibly the most damning evidence ever recorded. The kind of material that conspiracy theorists had speculated about for decades. Proof that the moon landing may have been staged. Of course, he had to keep a level head. It could still be a hoax. Maybe a film school project from the 80s. Maybe a satire, who knew? But the film stock was real. It smelled like age and acetate. The hiss of the analog audio. The grain. The washed-out colours. It all matched the era. And it wasn't just visuals. The voices. The jargon. The way they spoke. It screamed authenticity. With a shaky hand, Nolan continued searching. In a separate, real logbook, he found an odd reference. PSH, Kubrick Liaison. His chest tightened. Stanley Kubrick. It wasn't spelled out completely. The note was rushed, sloppy. S.Q. Cub. But the implications were terrifying. Nolan remembered the old rumours. Whispers that NASA had approached Kubrick to help create contingency footage in case the real mission failed. It sounded insane, but the breadcrumbs were piling up. Another reel label made his stomach drop. Moon Landing Studio. Revan. Revan. That wasn't a known NASA site. Nothing public anyway. That night, as the wind howled outside the empty facility, paranoia began to gnaw at Nolan's nerves. The rows of metal shelves now seemed sinister. The long corridors echoed with creaks and distant hums. Every flicker of overhead light made him turn his head. At one point, he thought he saw movement, just a faint shadow slipping between aisles. Maybe it was just the lights or the stress. But he wasn't taking chances. He secured the reels in a storage closet and locked it tight. Then he returned to his workstation to finish digitizing the suspect footage, intent on backing everything up. If something happened, he needed copies, proof. That's when the second shock hit him. The reel labelled Apollo 11 Stage B. Take 3 was gone. He had left it right there on the spool. He hadn't moved it. No one else should have had access. Frantically, he searched. Under the desk, behind equipment, every case and crate. Nothing. In its place was a single reel he didn't recognize. A handwritten label in red ink, Selene E. Do not watch. This wasn't a mistake. Someone had deliberately removed the damning footage and replaced it with... what? A threat? A trap? Heart racing, Nolan hesitated, then placed the reel in the projector. Static filled the screen. Then a blurred image of an empty crater appeared, flickering. A voice whispered, distorted, backward. "This is not for you. Turn back." Quick, cuts followed, spliced rocket footage, then the face of an older man, half lit in shadow, lips moving in silence. His eyes were glassy, blank, more static. End. Nolan sat frozen. Whatever Project Selene was, it wasn't just about archiving space, missions. It was about controlling a narrative, one so deeply woven into history that to challenge it would mean unraveling decades of belief. If these tapes were authentic, then everything, the televised landings, the heroes, the pride, was a script, a performance. But if it was all a fabrication, who had orchestrated it? And how far would they go to protect the lie? He needed help, someone who could verify the reels, someone with access to official records, someone who wasn't bound by NASA's walls anymore. The name came to him immediately: Dr. Eliza Trent, a respected aerospace historian and former NASA contractor, known for her brutal honesty and sharp intellect. The next morning, Nolan drove to a small, weather-beaten office building in downtown Houston. The plaque on the door read, Trent Aerospace Historical Consulting. Inside, books and documents were stacked in uneven piles. Models of rockets and capsules sat between dusty file folders. Dr. Trent, a sharp-eyed woman in her early 50s with silver streaks in her hair and a no-nonsense air, met him with a firm look. "You're the archivist who left that voicemail," she said, already recognizing him despite the alias he'd used. "Said you had something urgent." Nolan nodded. "Yes, I didn't know who else to contact." He reached into his coat and carefully handed her a thumb drive. "Just, please watch this. Some of it." Dr. Trent inserted the drive into her laptop, and the screen came alive with grainy footage. Astronauts on a set, clapperboards, lunar lander props. She leaned in, watching silently. Then, as the scene switched to Selene B, the shadowy suits around the makeshift set, her eyebrows lifted, her lips tightening. "Where did you get this?" she asked quietly. Nolan hesitated. A facility, Cold War era. The name Arcadia came up, and something called Project Selene. Dr. Trent didn't speak for a moment. She stared at the screen, then finally leaned back in her chair. "If this is real," she said slowly, "you have something that people have killed to keep buried." She leaned closer to the monitor, her brows furrowed in intense focus as she zoomed in on specific frames. The grain of the film, the cadence of the voices, the stitching on the suits, they all had to match. This could be incredibly damning. "If it's real," she murmured under her breath, the glow of the screen reflecting in her glasses. "But it might also be an elaborate fake. I've seen good hoaxes before." She glanced at Nolan. "Let me cross-check some specifics. The production lot numbers on the film stock, the old NASA logos, pass badges, anything that can pin this to a real era." Nolan sat stiffly, recalling what he'd found. The odd reel swaps, the whispers played in reverse on the Selene AE reels, and that missing spool from the night before. Dr. Trent's face darkened. "If you're telling the truth," she said, gravely, "then you're in danger. People don't just steal classified reels for fun." She leaned back, rubbing her temples. NASA always insisted that the major mission footage was archived. Some reels lost over time, sure, but never anything that would suggest they faked anything. Still, she paused. There were rumors among the older engineers. Quiet talk of a Plan B if the live feed from the moon failed. No hard proof, just whispers. She looked back at the footage, adjusting the color levels. But this might be it. Or something even bigger. They spent hours poring over the tiniest details, a mission patch barely visible in the background, a distorted voice referencing camera angles that perfectly matched real lunar module telemetry. Trent's skepticism began to crack, and then she froze. "That face," she whispered, pointing at the screen. "I've seen him before, in a group photo from the 60s. NASA staff, always in a black suit, never appeared in public records." Nolan leaned in. "Who is he?" "Rumored to be NASA's media liaison. Super hush-hush. Worked closely with someone big in Hollywood, possibly Kubrick. He never gave interviews, never appeared in front of a camera." Her theory was simple but chilling. During the Cold War, the pressure to beat the Soviets was immense. If they couldn't land in time, maybe they staged a backup film. But this looks like a full-scale simulation, like the entire thing was orchestrated from the start. She let out a slow breath. This changes everything. Before they parted that night, she urged Nolan to tread carefully and gather more evidence. She'd cross-reference NASA's official archives and reach out to some retired contacts. The next morning, Nolan returned to the old facility, only to find the building sealed off. A shiny new renovation sign read, "Property of Arcadia Aerospace." Harlow, the liaison, was gone. Security stood firm. No one was allowed in. The project was indefinitely suspended. Frustrated and now deeply suspicious, Nolan tried to call Harlow's number. Disconnected, they were shutting it down, scrubbing it clean. He rushed back to his apartment, breath shallow and hands clammy. If the tapes were gone, he still had his digitized versions, at least a few clips. He backed them up on multiple flash drives, paranoia rising with every passing second. But when he tried to email Dr. Trent the latest reel, his laptop flashed an error. File blocked, suspicious content. Someone had infiltrated his system. He wasn't just being paranoid, they were watching. Hours passed in a haze. Then, while sifting through old reels he'd already digitized, he found something odd, an unlabeled snippet. The footage was grainy, clearly shot in the mid-70s. A man sat alone in a corner, face half lit by a harsh overhead lamp, glancing nervously at the camera. The audio track was reversed. Nolan quickly reversed it. Project Selene. Never meant to be seen, the man said in a hoarse whisper. We built illusions for a greater cause. He coughed, spat. We lied. Or we lost the war. A beat of silence. Then, I left a final record in the Saturn archives. The tape ended in static. Nolan sat frozen, heart racing. Saturn archives? He immediately thought of the Saturn V rocket documentation, but Trent had already checked all of that. Maybe it was a code, a hidden file set, or a totally different archive. Off books. The man on the reel might have been the so-called Red Hand, the mythical insider who first blew the whistle. If this was real, there could be a larger cache of evidence buried somewhere, the kind that could expose everything. He called Dr. Trent again. Her voice trembled. They broke into my home office, took my NASA microfilms. There are men parked outside in black sedans, watching. I don't think they're just government. Arcadia Aerospace might be a shell, a cover for something much darker. Then we need to meet. In public, Nolan said, gripping his phone. Somewhere busy. They agreed on a crowded bus station the next day. Nolan would bring the new reel, but the next morning, she didn't show. Her phone was off. No response. That same day, news broke. 2 retired NASA engineers, both peripheral to the lunar missions, died suddenly. One of a stroke, the other a heart attack. Nolan sat in his darkened apartment, curtains drawn, the last reel playing silently in the background. His chest felt tight. Every knock at the door, every buzz from his phone now made his stomach drop. He was alone with the truth, and someone out there wanted to keep it buried. but the timing reeked of a cover-up. Mainstream media said nothing, just the usual news cycle, churning out politics and sports. But deep in the corners of obscure conspiracy forums, the chatter intensified. Moon archivist missing, spike in NASA retiree deaths, Project Selene rumor escalating. One user with the handle Apollo Truth posted a single cryptic sentence: "Look to LB7, the final broadcast is hidden." Nolan stared at the screen, heart thudding. LB7, it sounded familiar. Lunar Base 7 maybe? Or was it a code name, a hidden stage referenced in the tapes? He dove into his digitized archive, scrubbing through unlabeled folders, until he found a file with a fragment that matched: LB7 Dato. It was buried beneath layers of misnamed video dumps. He opened it. The footage flickered to life. Bizarre outtakes, raw and unedited. Rovers staged carefully, multiple crater backdrops, clearly artificial. A boom mic even dipped into frame in one clip. Off-screen voices barked cues, and part of a script appeared in the margins. The audience sees only the final cut. In another snippet, a NASA official stood beside a rigged set saying, "We can't let them see the Starfield discrepancy. Keep it black." Nolan leaned back in his chair, chilled. It wasn't just edited, it was manipulated, possibly reshot, possibly fabricated. His skin prickled with dread. Outside his apartment, cars had started to linger too long. A dark sedan circled twice in the same hour. The building's caretaker, an old man who barely spoke, muttered to Nolan in the stairwell. Two men came by, asked for you, showed badges, didn't look like cops. Nolan's gut turned. He spent that night packing in silence. Flash drives, cables, his battered laptop, the reels, his lifeline, stuffed into a duffel bag. He didn't turn on his phone, didn't use cards. He bought a ticket in cash and boarded a night bus out of town. Only one lead remained. Something Dr. Trent had once mentioned in passing. A desert station, off-grid. An alleged NASA telemetry site that stored raw backup feeds, signals, logs, possibly untouched by the propaganda machine. If the deception was stored in tapes, maybe the truth was stored in code. He slumped into his seat as the bus pulled away, headlights cutting through darkness, the world outside dissolving into streaks of yellow and black. Exhausted, he drifted into uneasy sleep, the road humming, beneath him. Then, static. Inside his dream, a voice whispered through distorted audio. "We told them we were first. The Soviets believed we soared. Project Selene won the world's heart, no matter the cost." Nolan jerked awake, sweat on his brow. That phrase again, no matter the cost. What was the cost now? His career, his freedom, his life. He was heading straight into it. The final confrontation wasn't a courtroom or a press conference. It was a sun-scorched highway stretching into nowhere. The destination, a forgotten outpost, rumored to guard forgotten truth. And closing in, behind him were those who would kill to preserve the myth. As dawn broke, the bus dropped him in the middle of the desert. No signs, no taxis, no shade. He walked for hours, heat waves rippling off the sand-blasted road. His duffel bag dragged down his shoulder, the laptop banging against his side with every step. He followed only a rumor, a breadcrumb trail of half-memories and paranoid whispers. Eventually he saw it, a rusted sign, barely legible. NASA remote telemetry site. 7. It stood behind a fence topped with barbed wire. Squat concrete buildings crouched low to the ground, their windows dust-covered and cracked. Faded paint peeled from walls. But this was it. A sensor clicked faintly as he approached. Was it still operational? He circled until he found a weak corner. In the fence, clipped it open with bolt cutters he'd swiped from an abandoned maintenance shed nearby. The main door to the building was locked, but the metal was soft with rust. He jammed the edge of a crowbar beneath the handle and heaved. It gave way with a screech. Inside, silence. The air was dead and heavy with dust, like a tomb. But past the debris, past the corridors, he found it, what looked like a control room. Old consoles lined the walls, each tagged with fading labels. Apollo, Gemini, Deep Space, TLM. The equipment was ancient, but real, not props. He stared, stunned. This was a command link, a real one. Could this place still hold data? Backups of raw moon transmissions, the unfiltered telemetry that might reveal what had really happened on those iconic missions. If so, it might be the final puzzle piece, the confirmation the world never got, the proof that the biggest story ever told was, in part or in whole, a lie. Outside, unseen eyes were watching. Inside, Nolan prepared to dig through history's last vault, and the truth waited, buried beneath dust and denial. The locks on the far corner door looked too new, too deliberate. If the Watchers really wanted to keep up their illusion, they'd need to maintain something here. Nolan's chest tightened. Whatever was behind that door wasn't meant to be seen. Steeling himself, he forced the door open with a shuddering groan. It creaked into a smaller lab, dusty but disturbingly modern. Not as abandoned as it had looked from the outside. A few monitors blinked faintly in sleep mode, their LEDs pulsing like slow heartbeats. His breath quickened. He scanned the room and spotted a terminal still powered. Above it, a handwritten note pinned to the wall read, "Archive Selene, authorized access only." "Bingo," Nolan muttered. He connected his laptop to the terminal. The screen lit up and prompted for credentials. He typed quickly, "Selene, error." Tried again, "Apollo 1969, denied." He cursed under his breath. Searching the cluttered desk, he found a torn note tucked under a keyboard. Partial codes, a scribbled reference to Tranquility Base. It was a long shot. He typed it in. The screen flashed green. Access granted, a flood of directories loaded. Before his eyes. Live stage, feed 69. Simulation mix-ups. Broadcast cuts-each folder whispered confirmation. Someone had simulated coverage, at least parts of it. It hadn't all been real. Then he saw another folder. Archive. Trent Comms Doctor. Eliza Trent. His pulse jumped. That name had surfaced before. A whistleblower. Researcher. Inside was a single video file. He clicked it. The grainy footage flickered to life. Dr. Trent sat in a dim room, visibly shaken. Men in dark suits loomed around her. "We can't keep lying to them," she pleaded, voice cracking. "People deserve the feed cut." Nolan jerked back. He stared at the screen, gut churning. They'd taken her. Silenced her. No more hiding. He had to act, fast. The Watchers would know someone accessed this system. In the far corner, he noticed an old satellite uplink system, originally used in the 60s for deep space communications. Ancient, but maybe still functional. If he could get it running, he could push the raw data to wideband radio and civil channels, outside the reach of internet sensors. No filters, no takedowns, just truth. He rummaged through cabinets, yanking out dusty cables, patching them in with shaky hands. The generator coughed, then rumbled to life. The satellite dish on the roof groaned as it repositioned, aiming at the sky. The terminal buzzed with new options. Civil frequencies, low Earth broadcasts, emergency radio bands. He selected everything. Then he uploaded it all. Raw footage of actors rehearsing moon landings, directors calling cues, astronauts practicing the moon bounce, and Dr. Trent's clip, her last recorded words. He hit transmit. The screen blinked. Upload progress, 10%, 20%. Then, boots on concrete outside. Nolan froze. Flashlight beams slashed through the dust beyond the hallway. Shadows moved. They were here. He shoved a filing cabinet against the door just as fists slammed against it from the other side. The door cracked from a burst of gunfire. Splinters flew 60%. Nolan ducked behind the console, shaking, breath shallow. He reached for the flare gun he'd found earlier. Not a weapon, just a distraction. Still, it was all he had. He waited, then fired. The room filled with red light. Confusion, yells. Return fire tore through the equipment. The console sparked, monitors shattered, but the bar kept climbing, 80%. The door finally buckled. They stormed. In, tactical gear, weapons raised. One of them, masked and clearly in command, raised his rifle. "Shut it down, now," he barked. "You're out of time. No one else has to die." Nolan shouted back, trembling. "It's already out. It's done." The masked man lunged for the cables, but Nolan had anticipated that. He'd created redundancies, locked down every feed. The bar ticked, 95%. Gunfire ripped through the console. Sparks flew. Nolan felt the ground tremble. Then, 100%. A loud beep confirmed it. The files were gone, streamed directly to satellites, mirrored, distributed. The watchers couldn't stop it now. The masked man froze, realizing the failure. "We'll bury you," he hissed. He aimed. A shot thundered. Nolan's chest exploded in pain. He collapsed, gasping, vision swimming. Blood soaked his shirt. Around him, the watchers scrambled, futilely smashing gear, but it no longer mattered. Somewhere nearby, a final monitor glowed faintly. Broadcast to all frequencies, transmission complete. In that instant, across countless radio waves, emergency bands, back-channel networks, and even hacked TV feeds, the truth began to play. People across the globe saw dusty sound stages dressed as the lunar surface. They heard directors coaching astronauts. "More float in your step. Remember, it's low gravity." They watched as Dr. Trent begged not to keep lying. The illusion shattered. Social media caught fire. News networks couldn't keep up. Even die-hard skeptics sat frozen as raw footage unspooled in front of them. By morning, the cover-up was drowning beneath a tsunami of public rage and disbelief. Every attempt the watchers made to discredit it was swallowed by the noise. Back in the lab, Nolan lay still. The watchers stood over him, silent. Their boots clanged as they turned and disappeared into the night. Alone in that silence, with blood pooling beneath him, Nolan remembered that voice from the first reel. The old archivist whispering what now echoed across the world. "We told them we left Earth. We never had to." He felt oddly calm, even as pain tore through his chest and vision dimmed at the edges. He had done it. He had completed the mission. The truth was out. Somewhere, he hoped, Dr. Trent would see the broadcast, know she wasn't alone, and maybe, just maybe, survive. By sunrise, the world cracked open. Unfiltered footage had flooded the internet like a virus no one could stop. It hit Twitter, fringe streaming platforms, Telegram groups, ephemeral video apps, pirate radio stations, everywhere. The images were damning. Fake craters on sound stages, giant overhead rigs simulating low gravity, snippets of dialogue between supposed NASA officials and what looked like Hollywood set crews. Pan left. Keep the shadow out of frame. Remember, it's supposed to look like a single light source. Reset the bounce rig. He's floating too stiff. For many, it felt like the betrayal of the century. The moon landing, one of humanity's proudest achievements, was suddenly suspect. Others, the skeptics who had been mocked for decades, felt vindicated. Forums that once teetered on the edge of the internet were now headlines on mainstream outlets. The debate shifted fast. Was everything fake, or just parts? Could it be that real missions occurred, but the televised events were staged as insurance against failure? NASA and the White House moved quickly, scrambling to discredit the footage. Forged. AI-enhanced propaganda. An act of cyber-terrorism, but the recordings showed deep-level knowledge, technical language, mission rosters, behind the scenes, protocol talk that would be nearly impossible to fake. It wasn't just convincing, it was overwhelming. Reputable media outlets dissected the material, building timelines, interviewing experts. Questions multiplied. If the public moon footage was staged, what else had been manipulated in the name of national pride? NASA insisted they were investigating. Retired astronauts were contacted. Some angrily dismissed the footage, calling it insulting garbage. Others declined interviews. A few had passed away in recent years under mysterious circumstances. Arcadia. Aerospace, the front company that had quietly employed Nolan, became the next target of scrutiny. Reporters dug up connections to Cold War-era intelligence programs. Their official line? We were told this was legacy NASA material. We had no reason to suspect otherwise. It didn't help. Internal leaks soon showed Arcadia was anything but innocent. Protests erupted outside NASA centers across the country. Crowds held up signs, "We deserve the real truth." No more lies in the stars. Some wept, staring at posters of Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin, their heroes now shadowed in doubt. Sarah Voss, missing for months, resurfaced. She had fled the watchers, but returned with a vengeance. Her editorial, published under international protection, was titled Project Selene, the greatest story never told. In it, she revealed the entire operation. How she and Nolan had worked to uncover missing reels. How Nolan had pushed the truth live. She confirmed what many feared. He hadn't made it. She called him a tragic hero whose name will be remembered whenever people ask what the stars are hiding. Hashtags exploded. Selene Files. Moon hoax exposed. Nolan Price lives. NASA released a stiff statement. We categorically deny any staging of the Apollo missions. All accusations are based on maliciously edited material. But behind the scenes, cracks showed. Former engineers began to talk. One admitted strange orders to restrict access to certain broadcast trucks in 1969. Another remembered a moonset inside a California film studio, dismissed at the time as a training prop. Public faith fractured. Some clung to hope that we really had gone to the moon, but staged only some footage as Cold War insurance. Others believed everything, from start to finish, had been fabricated to win a space race by illusion. A portion of the population rejected the footage entirely. Deepfakes, they argued. It's all synthetic. They needed to believe. As truth and fiction blurred, society teetered. In the chaos, the watchers seemed to vanish. No public denials, no arrests, no names, only footprints in classified. Documents and cold trails. Had they gone underground again? Or had they simply moved on to another illusion? For some, the questions ignited new resolve. If anything, the scandal reinvigorated interest in real space exploration. For others, it crushed dreams. If the moon landing was theatre, what hope was there for Mars? Dr. Eliza Trent, recovering from months in captivity, gave a quiet interview. There were some real missions, she said. But the first one, what the world saw, it had to be staged. The politics, the stakes. It wasn't just science, it was survival. Her voice broke. And the cost was trust. The cost was everything. A year passed. Controversies kept burning. Documentaries, investigations, new books. A bestseller titled The Selene Deception traced the history of the illusion and the men who maintained it. Hollywood, never shy about capitalizing, rolled out a docudrama called Lunar Lie. Nolan Price, once a nobody, became a legend. Memorials were held. Some praised him as a martyr for truth. Others warned he had shattered something sacred. Scientists worried the chaos had damaged space programs permanently. Mistrust was contagious, and in a thrift shop in rural Florida, a battered film canister sat between moldy VHS tapes. The label, Selene Launch, Rehearsal 5. A customer found it while digging for old sci-fi. They saw the NASA stamp, thought, it might be cool, bought it for $1. They didn't know what it held. They hadn't played it yet, but if they ever did, they'd find a single, continuous take, never meant for broadcast, of something the world had only begun to understand. An astronaut stumbled clumsily under the harsh brightness of stage lights, the illusion of lunar soil crunching beneath his boots. Sweat glistened on his face as he yanked off his helmet mid-moonwalk, muttering, "God, it's boiling in here." His voice echoed oddly in the cavernous space. The inside of the helmet was fogged up, streaked with condensation. Not exactly the image the public was supposed to see. The KHN's prop label on the back wall, faint but still readable, read, "Final illusions, keep locked." One more, clue misplaced. Or maybe intentionally left behind, waiting for someone curious enough to piece it all together. As for Nolan, no one really knew what became of him. Whispers swirled like fog in forgotten corners of the internet. A lone fisherman off the Gulf Coast swore he gave a lift to a quiet, weary man who carried nothing but a duffel bag full of old film reels. A niche blogger posted about receiving an anonymous envelope with no return address, just a handwritten note that said, "Thank you for defending the truth." But was it him? Or just the story growing teeth in the shadows? If Nolan survived, he'd become a ghost in his own story, a man consumed by what he unearthed. Project Selene was no longer a secret. It had leaked into the collective subconscious, carried in threads of suspicion and late-night rabbit holes. Illusions, once used to unite a nation or inflate its pride, can also rot it from within once revealed. Pull back the curtain too far, and all that's left is disillusionment and distrust. So now, every quiet night, when the sky clears and the moon hangs pale and heavy above us, people stare and wonder, did we really go there? Or was it all just a performance, projected from a soundstage in Nevada, or an underground bunker the public was never meant to see? The search for truth, real, unfiltered, uncomfortable, has always been the domain of the restless, the dreamers, the doubters, and perhaps the doomed. Project Selene stands now as a dark monument in the chronicles of human ambition, not a leap forward, but a step into a void built on secrets and staged applause. From somewhere deep in a dusty NASA archive, an old spool of magnetic tape might still whisper in a crackling voice. We told them it was a great leap for mankind, but it was only a quiet shuffle into the shadows. Over the next half hour, you'll meet Agent Silas Rock, Dr. Liana Sesh, and Director Vance Haler, three figures caught in a widening web of secrets around a deadly pathogen codenamed VX73. Their lives will twist through control, fear, betrayal, and the question of whether the truth is a cure or just another form of contagion. It began, like most disasters do, with a headline: "Mysterious respiratory illness detected in Port Maxwell." A blip in the news cycle. Easy to miss. A local concern. But within days, reports of similar symptoms trickled in from across the country. Dry cough, sudden fever, difficulty breathing. It was quiet at first, drowned beneath the static of politics and celebrity scandals. Then, everything shifted. X73 wasn't just a flu, it hit like a sledgehammer. By the second week, hospitals overflowed, city buses stopped running, supermarkets turned into echo chambers of empty shelves. Entire metro areas were locked down, enforced under what officials called temporary containment measures. For Agent Silas Rock, a 42-year-old operative at the Bureau of Federal Integrity, life dissolved into directives and dispatches. He wore his usual dark suit, but under it, a bulletproof vest and a respirator mask that always left red marks along his cheeks. He was trained for infiltration, surveillance, subversion. He wasn't trained for watching cities go dark block by block. He walked the sterile, humming corridors of the BFI, lit by flickering fluorescents that made everything look pale and cold. Every wall was papered with bulletins, infection zones, projected death tolls, containment protocols. Giant digital screens displayed maps splashed with red. Areas where the virus had taken hold were marked like bleeding wounds. Overhead, a recorded female voice chimed in every 30 minutes. Stay indoors, comply with NSB guidelines, trust in the stabilization process. The National Stabilization Bureau, NSB, was a newer creation, born from the crisis, meant to unify federal responses. Some called it necessary. Others whispered darker things about unchecked power, about a government turning inward on itself. Director Vance Haylor led the NSB. Tall, lean, and always seen in pristine suits, he had a presence that silenced rooms. His face appeared often on internal feeds, updating staff about biometric scans, surveillance rollouts, and the so-called Unity Serum, the vaccine the world was counting on. Silas barely knew Haylor, but he'd seen enough to understand the man's mindset. Obsessed with control, with order, Haylor radiated the kind of intensity that made people either follow him or fear him. Maybe both. Silas tried not to let his doubts show. He was a loyal agent. That's what he kept telling himself. If the vaccine worked, if it meant saving lives, then the mission was righteous. Then came the summons. A coded message, flagged red, high clearance meeting. He assumed it was another task force deployment, maybe a containment zone assignment. Instead, he found himself in a small, windowless room, face to face with a panel of stone-faced executives. They spoke quietly, deliberately. "There's disinformation circulating," one said, not meeting his eyes. "Claims the virus isn't natural," another added, "that it's engineered." Silas sat in silence, the hum of the lights buzzing like static in his ears. "These rumors are spreading online," said the lead official, voice clipped. "They're eroding public trust. We need to identify the leak and neutralize the source." It sounded reasonable. Misinformation during a crisis could be as deadly as the virus itself. Riots, panic, civil collapse. Silas nodded, took the assignment, but as he dug deeper into digital logs, underground forums, encrypted chat threads, something didn't sit right. The conversations he uncovered weren't chaotic or conspiratorial. They were careful, detailed. Some of the users shared language, schematics, biolab manifests that didn't seem faked, and some of the usernames. They matched internal BFI, staff, aliases. Something inside Silas shifted. Doubt, sharp and heavy, planted itself deep in his chest. What if the conspiracy wasn't outside? What if the leak wasn't the danger? But the truth. Silas had spent countless hours combing through internal databases, most of it dull, procedural noise. But this time something caught his eye, a file that shouldn't have been there, unencrypted, labeled simply Project Paragon Preliminary. That in itself was odd. Files like that didn't just float around unsecured on the Bureau of Federal Integrity's servers. It was buried deep in a maze of nested subdirectories, tucked away as if someone had meant for it to be found. But only by someone who knew exactly where to look. Whoever hid it had high-level clearance. Silas hesitated, heart thudding in his chest, then clicked it open. Inside were clinical, deliberately vague references to VX73. References dated months before the virus was publicly detected. He scrolled slowly, each line pressing heavier on. His gut. Field tests planned in controlled sectors. Monitor subject compliance and social response. His hands went cold. Compliance? Since when did viral research measure obedience? The further he read, the worse it got. One buried link led to a redacted contract between the Department of Defense and a private biotech firm. Another series of memos mentioned massive corporate backers, pharmaceutical giants with existing investments in vaccines, testing kits, and biometric tracking systems. It didn't look like a response to a crisis. It looked like a plan. Silas leaned back, staring blankly at the screen. If this data was legitimate, then everything, the panic, the shutdowns, even the so-called vaccine rollout, might be rooted in a deception deeper than he'd ever imagined. His breath came shallow, his throat tight. Still, he didn't panic, not yet. He copied everything onto a flash drive, slipped it into a hidden pocket sewn into his jacket, and wiped his activity log. Over the next few days, he dug deeper, carefully. He used encrypted proxies to stay off internal radars, but he could still sense it. Something had changed. The Bureau's security chatter was louder than usual. Keywords like internal breach and data anomaly began popping up across private threads. Someone else was looking, maybe someone above him, or worse, someone watching him. That's when he came across a new name, Dr. Liana Suresh, a virologist once affiliated with a private biotech outfit called Cerulean Labs. Her name was linked to VX73 antigen development, specifically within documents concerning compliance metrics. Again, that word. One file stood out. VX73 antigen trial shows 62% compliance rate. Additional modifications required. The document was dated almost a year before the outbreak. Silas stared at it for a long time, unable to look away. The implications clawed at his mind. Was the virus released intentionally? Was the vaccine more than just a cure? Was it a tool for behavioral control? He didn't want to believe it. His entire career had been built on loyalty, trust in the mission. But now he was staring at a possibility that made him physically ill. He told himself he needed more proof. Theories meant nothing without evidence. That night, he left the BFI building without saying a word to anyone. The flash drive sat against his chest, tucked behind the jacket lining like a secret too dangerous to exist. The streets outside were hollow. Curfew was in full effect. Armored trucks rolled down avenues that had once been filled with life. Drones buzzed overhead, scanning alleys and rooftops for signs of movement. On every corner, digital billboards displayed the same message in stark white against black. Unity, serum, your key to tomorrow. Silas ducked into the shadow of an old payphone booth, one of the few still standing. He pulled the receiver close and dialed a number from memory. An old contact, a former BFI analyst with strong hacking credentials and a personal grudge against the Bureau. The line clicked. "Hello? It's me," Silas said, voice low. "I need a favor. No questions." A pause. "Jesus, all right. But if you're calling me now, things must be bad." "They are." Silas gave him access to a secure dump link. "Get in. Backtrace everything. Find the full version of Project C. Paragon. Done," the voice replied. "But Silas, be careful. They're not playing by the old rules anymore." As he hung up, the city pressed in around him. Neon signs flickered across darkened windows. Shuttered storefronts lined the blocks like gravestones. He glanced up. A spotlight snapped on above him, cast from a patrolling drone. It locked on his face, scanned his ID tag. He forced his expression blank. The drone beeped once. Green. It veered off. Not flagged. Not yet. He moved quickly, slipping into a side entrance of the underground metro. The tunnels smelled of rust and old machinery. Down here, away from the eyes in the sky, he let himself breathe again. Barely. He'd spent years believing in the Bureau's mission. Years thinking he was on the right side. But what if the real threat wasn't the virus, but the agenda wrapped around it? Outside, the world was unraveling. VX73 had turned major cities into ghost towns. Entire economies shuttered. Curfews weren't just guidelines, they were laws backed by force. Those who disobeyed vanished into containment camps, supposedly for quarantine, but no one ever saw them again, and yet the media spun the same narrative every hour. VX73 was mutating. VX73 was relentless, but there was hope, a miracle. Director Vance Haler appeared on every channel, calm and unblinking, repeating his gospel in a polished suit. Unity serum is our future, over 90% efficacy. Together, we will rise. The public clung to it like a lifeline, but Silas couldn't unsee the fine print behind the curtain. The serum rollout was conditional. To receive it, one had to submit to biometric registration, ongoing behavioral monitoring, and acceptance of NSB's new civic compliance initiative. It wasn't just a vaccine, it was a key and a lock on freedom, on thought, on truth. Silas tightened his grip on the flash drive. The next move he made wouldn't just determine his career. It might define the rest of his life. Betray the system, or expose it. He already knew. Now he had to survive long enough to do it. Those who refused the jab lost access to everything. Banks, public transport, even basic identification. Within a month, unvaccinated people were cut off completely, pushed to the fringes of society like ghosts. They scavenged, bartered, or leaned on black market contacts just to get by. It felt less like a country and more like a twisted experiment. Amid the collapse, Agent Silas Raw kept up appearances. By day, he flashed his BFI badge and performed official compliance checks, a cog in the machine. But by night, he transformed, digging obsessively into a file he wasn't supposed to know existed. Project Paragon. It wasn't just some dusty folder. The deeper Silas went, the more disturbing the fragments became. Redacted references, encrypted memos. He began to piece together something horrifying, something no one was meant to see. One classified document described a nano-emitter embedded in the vaccine, targeting the brain's limbic system. Another read, neurological regulation markers confirm mild sedation of aggression, increased docility, potential for broader cognitive modulation pending further trials. Silas nearly vomited. Could they really have used a public health crisis to quietly install a mind-altering device into the population? He needed answers. Over a secure channel, he reached out to Dr. Liana Suresh, the lead scientist named in the files. She was cautious, answering only in tight, coded fragments at first. It took days of slow, deliberate conversation before she agreed to meet. The place, a warehouse near the old docks, abandoned, forgotten. Silas arrived 30 minutes early. He scanned the area. No drones in the sky, no parked cars, just the distant clang of metal against metal and the salty scent of the bay creeping in with the wind. A broken street lamp buzzed faintly overhead, casting light that barely pushed back the dark. Then she appeared, hood up, mask covering half her face. Only her eyes were visible, sharp, tired, and mistrusting. She moved with the calculated caution of someone who knew what it meant to be hunted. One hand stayed near her coat pocket. "Why should I believe you're not one of them?" she asked flatly, voice barely above a whisper. Silas didn't flinch. He reached into his coat and handed her the flash drive. "Because I've seen what they buried," he said. "And I still came." She hesitated, eyeing the drive, then him. Her shoulders relaxed just a little. "I was on the early design team for VX-73, she admitted. "We were told it was a safeguard, something to defend against a future supervirus. They pitched it as a national security measure." She paused, as if choosing whether or not to keep going. "We altered genetic markers, made sure the virus would target specific alveolar receptors. But we didn't know they'd actually release it." Silas's heart pounded harder. He swallowed. "The files mention a compliance mechanism, some kind of behavioral influence. Is that real?" Liana looked away. "It's not mind control," she said finally. "Not like movies show it. It's subtle. It lowers resistance, nudges you toward trust, toward obedience. Your mind gets quieter, less questioning. They want people passive, easy to manage." The words hit Silas like a punch, even after everything he'd read. Hearing it out loud, raw and unfiltered, sent a chill through his spine. They talked for over an hour, voices low, glancing over their shoulders between sentences. At last, Liana handed him a battered thumb. "Drive. This has my original research," she said. "Unredacted. Proof VX-73 isn't natural, and proof they embedded something in the vaccine to pacify people." He took it, hand trembling slightly. "If they catch you with that, you won't get arrested," she warned. "You'll disappear." A rat scurried nearby, its tiny claws scratching across the cracked concrete. Silas's nerves were taut. Every Sound, the wind, the distant gulls, the water slapping the dock. It all felt amplified, as if the shadows were listening. They didn't hug, didn't shake hands, just nodded and went their separate ways, like two ghosts in the night. Back at BFI headquarters, Silas played the part, smiled, nodded, filed reports. But each night, behind locked doors, he pored over Liana's data. Meanwhile, the capital slid further into madness. Streets emptied, drones buzzed overhead, shouting curfews through bright lights and distorted speakers. Loudspeakers repeated the same slogan all day, every day: stay safe, stay indoors, trust the cure. Restaurants reopened, but only for the vaccinated. Businesses too. Life looked normal, at least from the outside. Online, anything critical vanished within minutes. Entire forums blinked out. Dissenting posts were flagged, taken down, and their authors quietly banned. The feed filled with smiling faces, waving flags, and government slogans. It was like watching a stage play while the real world rotted behind the curtains. Silas knew what was coming, and he knew he didn't have much time. Businesses reopened, but only for those who carried the scannable immunity pass. A flick of a wrist, a green flash, and you were let inside. Yet something was different. People moved slower, spoke less, and no one seemed interested in asking questions anymore. No one talked about privacy violations or the growing power of the NSB. It was as if curiosity itself had been sedated, society wrapped in a blanket of quiet compliance. In the halls of government, Director Vance Haler had become a household name. On official broadcasts, his face was everywhere. Anchors praised him as a savior. He'd saved millions, stabilized the economy, restored order. Every outlet repeated the same lines. Unshakable resolve defeats chaos. What they didn't say, what they never said, was how much money corporate donors were raking in, or the fact that the Unity serum had undergone quiet modifications no one was allowed to discuss. Silas tried to play the part, to blend in, but the lie wore heavier each day. He passed co-workers in the corridor, men and women he used to trust, now are wearing the same eerie smiles. Their edges had dulled, the spark in their eyes gone. One afternoon, he tried testing the waters. Ever think it's strange how fast the lockdowns escalated, even before the infection curve really started? His colleague, a data analyst named Rockwell, blinked slowly. His eyes went vacant for a second before he replied with a lazy shrug. Doesn't matter. They keep us safe. Then he turned back, to his terminal, typing away as if nothing had happened. Silas's blood turned cold. The serum was working. Whatever it was meant to do, dulling thought, blunting resistance, it was happening. Haller's plan wasn't just policy. It was transformation, a remapping of the human will and the BFI. They weren't just watching it unfold. They were helping. He had two choices: stay silent or destroy everything he'd built and expose the truth. That night, as he returned to his apartment, Silas spotted something unusual. A sealed envelope had been slid under his door. He picked it up carefully. No return address. Inside was a single line of typed text. This is bigger than you think. They see all. At the bottom, a small cryptic symbol was stamped in red ink. A circle, slashed diagonally like a stylized zero. He froze. He'd seen that mark before, buried in a restricted file that hinted at a resistance network operating below government radar. Someone believed he could be trusted. His hands trembled as he read the message again. Every instinct screamed caution, yet something in him shifted. This wasn't just about his conscience anymore. It was about survival, maybe everyone's. He powered on his laptop, still shaking. A few seconds later, a series of pings hit his inbox. A new assignment from the BFI: track and apprehend a known subversive suspected of smuggling contraband medical supplies. His heart nearly stopped. The name listed matched one found in Dr. Liana, Suresh's notes. It wasn't a coincidence. The Bureau was closing in. He wasn't just in danger. He was likely already on a watch list. He slammed the laptop shut. Outside, the city's lights shimmered against thick, dark clouds gathering above the skyline. Another storm was coming. Maybe literal, maybe not. If he waited any longer, he'd lose his chance. The next day, he drove out of the central district and stopped at a hill overlooking the containment zone formerly known as Glendale. Officially, the press called it a safety perimeter, but everyone on the ground called it what it really was, a dumping ground for the unvaccinated, the undesirables. Silas parked and watched from a distance. Families huddled in what used to be office buildings and storage units, now stripped and graffitied. Power came and went, trash piled in corners, and everywhere, roving Unity enforcers, armored and masked, checking IDs, peeking into windows, scanning infants for overdue vaccine updates. The air itself felt anxious, like the whole place was holding its breath. Silas clenched the steering wheel. This wasn't a containment zone, it was a slow death sentence. He had already reached out to the symbol-bearing group implied by the envelope. Through encrypted channels, he'd made contact with someone calling themselves Sparrow. The message was simple but direct. They could help him, get the truth out. Now came the hard part. Trust. They agreed to meet at an old print shop in the industrial quarter. Rumour was it had once produced underground papers before the NSB outlawed unsanctioned publishing. Silas took no chances. He ditched his car several blocks away, weaving through alleys, doubling back to lose any tail. No drones above, no shadows behind him. At least, not that he could see. He wore a worn hooded coat and a high-filtration respirator mask pulled up. Over half his face, the streets were mostly empty, just scattered debris and shuttered storefronts. He reached the print shop's back door, tapped twice, then once more. The boards on the windows rattled slightly. Inside, someone moved. The real resistance, he thought, might be nothing more than a few desperate people with too much to lose. But that was still better than a world sleepwalking into silence. He waited. The air inside the abandoned print shop was thick with the musty scent of ink and old paper. Stacks of unused flyers leaned like forgotten tombstones against rusted, dust-caked printing presses. The only light came from a flickering bulb overhead, casting dim shadows that danced along the stained concrete floor. A figure stepped from the gloom, short and wrapped in a black makeshift scarf that concealed most of their face. "You're late," they said, voice muffled but firm. Silas entered cautiously, breath shaky, nerves coiled tight. Had to lose a drone on the West End. Wasn't easy. The figure, Sparrow, nodded without comment and turned, leading him through a creaking doorway into a cramped back room. Inside, 6 others stood in tense silence. They wore dark, faded clothing and carried the kind of tired vigilance that only came from years of watching their backs. A battered laptop sat open on a folding table, cords tangled like vines, connected to a low hum of a generator in the corner. They introduced themselves one by one, offering only code names: Rook, Nightshade, Sahara, Wren, Ash, Latch. Each represented a different piece of the puzzle: journalists, medics, rogue programmers, a resistance cell working in the shadows, trying to pry the government's fingers off the throat of truth. Silas stepped forward, hand trembling slightly as he set down a thin, creased folder and a flash drive. "I have proof," he said, his voice hoarse. Dr. Liana Sesh's files. The virus was engineered. And the vaccine. It's more than a cure. It's behavioral manipulation, neurological programming. A heavy silence followed. Even the generator seemed to grow quieter. Sparrow took the folder, flipping through the contents slowly. "We've had our suspicions. People reporting strange mental fog, flat emotions, trouble forming memories. All after the injection." Nightshade nodded. "Some of our ex-military contacts told us the NSB's pouring billions into next-gen surveillance, biometric tracking, neuro-response mapping. But we didn't have hard evidence. Silas tapped the flash drive. That's everything. Raw logs from Liana's personal terminal. Uncut. Plus a blueprint labeled Project Paragon. It's what ties it all together. The Wall group gathered around the laptop. Rook plugged in the drive and began scanning files. Eyes widened, screens lit with line after line of damning data. It was real. This changes everything, Rook muttered, jaw tight. We can't just upload this to the net, Sparrow said. They'll scrub it in seconds. We need a signal they can't silence. Nightshade stepped to the wall and pointed at a tattered map of the Sierra Mountains. Here, old shortwave tower, still functional. We retrofit the hardware, hijack a comms satellite, and piggyback the files. Once it's out, it hits thousands of independent radio operators. They'll mirror it across continents. We only need minutes. It's off-grid, Sahara added, but crawling with patrols. Sparrow looked at Silas. We need you, your clearance, your maps, your knowledge of BFI security grids. We can't make this work without you. Silas hesitated. Every reason to run swam through his mind. Fear, guilt, doubt. But none of it mattered now. The truth had to get out. I'm in, he said quietly. Whatever it takes. Plans came together in whispered urgency. Step 1. Locate Dr. Liana Sesh. She had to speak during the broadcast. Only her voice, her credentials, could validate the data. Step 2. Move unnoticed. The BFI had raised internal security, hunting domestic threats like wildfire. Silas was already marked. Step 3. Cross the country underground. Safe houses, vehicle swaps, fake IDs. Step 4. Reach the tower. Slip past drones, armed patrols, sensor nets, and broadcast before the NSB could blink. It felt like suicide. But doing nothing would doom the world to silent obedience. Dulled minds fed on manufactured comfort. Before dawn the next day, Silas left the Bureau's headquarters for good. He torched what little remained of his identity. Old notes, badges, photos, burner phones, everything that could trace him back. He kept only a small go bag, sidearm, spare mags, encrypted drives, forged IDs, field, medkits. In a shadowed alley 2 blocks south of the East District checkpoint, the team waited inside a beat-up cargo van. No license plates, no windows, just rust and purpose. The drive to Liana's hideout took 2 days. They avoided Maine, roads, sleeping in barns and long-shuttered motels. Each day, the news grew stranger, more missing persons, more VX-73 complications, more digital blackouts. The walls were closing in. When they finally reached her, she looked pale and frantic. Her eyes darted behind them, as if expecting agents to burst through the door. One of my colleagues was found dead, she whispered. They're calling it a virus complication, but I know better. He knew about the logs. They're cleaning house. She collapsed into Silas's arms, shaking with relief. He gave her the shortest version of their plan. Her answer was immediate. I'm coming with you. I won't let them bury this. And so they moved again, deeper into the shadows. Every stop brought danger. Every checkpoint avoided felt like a miracle. But the deeper they went, the more determined they became. This wasn't just a leak anymore. It was a war for reality. Silas's face had become a symbol of betrayal. His Bureau of Federal Integrity photo was now plastered across every digital billboard and newsfeed, marked with a bold red warning, wanted for treason. The government had declared open war on truth, and Silas was now their most visible enemy. It wasn't long before safe houses began falling, one after another. Whispers came in through scrambled channels, operatives disappearing without a trace, entire resistance pockets vanishing overnight. The official story spoke of VX-73 exposure incidents, but those within the network knew better. These weren't medical casualties. They were executions, quiet purges, systematically wiping out anyone who questioned the official narrative. Then came the blow that nearly broke them. On a rain-soaked night, deep in a forest ravine, their convoy was ambushed. It happened fast. Muzzle flashes cracked like lightning across the darkness. Shouts turned to screams. In the mud and chaos, Silas watched Sahara drop, then Nightshade as she tried to return fire. Rook, always calm, always thinking, was hit twice before he could even reach cover. Silas, Sparrow and Liana ran blindly through the downpour, slipping through the underbrush, hearts pounding, blood mixing with rain. They didn't stop running until their lungs burned and the shots were long behind them. They had to leave everything, gear, supplies, even the vehicle. What they carried now was only grief and urgency. Inside a remote mountain cabin, lent to them by a retired doctor who once patched up resistance fighters, the silence was crushing. A flickering lantern lit the wooden walls, casting shadows that moved like ghosts. Liana sat curled near the stove, arms around her knees, eyes red but dry. "They died for this," she whispered, voice trembling. "For the truth. We can't stop now." Sparrow leaned against the wall, hand pressed to a bandaged shoulder where the bullet had grazed him. He said nothing. There was nothing left to say. Outside, the wind howled through the tall pines, and Silas couldn't shake the feeling that the forest itself was mourning. The world was unraveling. Every part of him wanted to give in, to lie down and disappear into the dirt. But instead, he stared into the lantern's glow. The same question, looping through his mind, can we still win this? Only two choices remained: press forward or let the darkness consume everything. Dawn came grey and bitter cold. They packed what little they had: canned food, water, fuel for one last run. They were going to the Sierra Mountains, to the old radio tower. It was their only chance to broadcast the unaltered Project Paragon files. The plan was simple but suicidal. Reach the tower, bypass analog failsafes, upload and transmit the full research logs on multiple frequencies. Even a few minutes might be enough. Enough to awaken the sleeping. Enough to start something no one could stop. But the enemy had grown bolder. Director Vance Haler had triggered something called the Silence Protocol, a last resort measure that authorized lethal force against anyone accused of spreading destabilizing misinformation. Halor now appeared on every screen. Silas saw him through a hacked satellite feed, standing at a podium, framed by armored guards. "We are at war," Halor intoned, his voice even, cold. "A war against a virus, both biological and ideological. We cannot let anarchists sabotage our progress. The new protocols are not oppression, they are protection." Behind him, the NSB insignia gleamed. An eagle clutching a syringe in one talon and a shield in the other. The message was clear. Obedience was safety, dissent was disease. Silas snapped the feed off. He looked at Liana and Sparrow. "Let's move." They left the cabin by midday, avoiding highways, weaving through service roads and old hunting trails. Every time they passed a cluster of homes, windows were boarded, doors barred shut. People were hiding, afraid to be seen, afraid to speak. The silence of fear stretched for miles. Storm clouds gathered overhead, as if nature itself sensed the tension building. Halfway through their journey, the narrow road ahead revealed a problem, a checkpoint. Unmanned, but rigged with an automated turret that scanned for vehicle transponders linked to verified vaccine IDs. Their van, stolen and unregistered, had none. A mechanical whir sounded. "Go!" Silas shouted. The turret spun and opened fire. Bullets tore through metal and glass, punching holes in the windshield. Sparrow yanked the wheel, crashing them into a shallow ditch. They bailed out, scrambling into the brush. Sparrow was hit. Just a graze on his shoulder, but it slowed him. While Liana provided cover, Silas looped around the rear of the checkpoint and yanked open the turret's control panel. Sparks flew as he jammed a handheld device into the override circuit. The gun jerked, sputtered, and died. They caught their breath in the wet grass, hearts hammering. No one spoke. There was no need. They continued on foot. The forest grew denser as dusk fell. Cold air settled in around them like a blanket of ice. Somewhere ahead, through the gaps in the trees, the silhouette of the radio tower emerged. It loomed, high on a distant ridge, sharp and angular like the bones of some forgotten god, a jagged sentinel against the dying light. Silas pulled a crumpled map from his pocket, eyes scanning the old schematics he'd stolen months ago. The tower's access point was buried beneath a maintenance hatch, low, hidden, and wired into analog. Systems the NSB never bothered to upgrade. This is it, he said. No one replied. But both Leanna and Sparrow nodded. They weren't just rebels now. They were the last thread left holding back the tide. The tower's broadcast equipment still worked. Barely, its systems humming weakly on emergency power. But that was the easy part. The real threat loomed above. A formation of heavily armed surveillance drones circling like vultures in the night sky. Crouched behind a jagged boulder, 3 conspirators stared at the facility ahead. The broadcast tower rose against the dark, fenced off with chain link and topped with razor wire. A guard post at the main gate pulsed with sensors, antennas twitching. No doubt they'd been expected. This wasn't an abandoned relay station. This was a trap. The BFI, or maybe the NSB, had seen them coming. Floodlights cast harsh shadows across the compound. Black SUVs idled near the main entrance, their engines too quiet, too ready. The tower's windows glowed with a dull yellow light. There was no question now. This place was armed and staffed. Sparrow, face half hidden under her hood, said nothing at first. Her eyes scanned the compound with the cold calm of someone who had already accepted how this might end. "We can't walk away now," she said finally. "This is it. We don't get a second shot." Leanna stood next to her, fingers trembling, against the grip of her tablet. Her voice came out softer than a whisper. "If you can cover me, I can get inside. I can start the broadcast. I just need a few minutes." Silas stared at the facility, his jaw tight, thoughts heavy with the weight of lost friends, those who died for this moment. He checked his sidearm and chambered around with a metallic click. "Let's finish this." They moved quickly, hugging the natural contours of a rocky slope that led up behind the tower. Timing was everything, slipping between drone passes, staying low. At the fence, Sparrow pulled out wire cutters and snapped the chain link. A sharp, metallic twang echoed, and then the alarm wailed like a banshee. "Shit!" Silas hissed. Flashlights flared in the darkness. Voices barked orders. Boots crunched gravel. They ran, hearts pounding, lungs burning, as the guard post erupted with gunfire. Bullets slammed into the scaffolding around them, sparking off metal. Silas fired back, not to kill, just enough to suppress. A guard yelped and fell. The others took cover. Leanna darted ahead, ducked under a half-lowered security shutter, and slipped inside the tower. Her chest heaved, adrenaline drowning her fear. Inside, the corridors were dim and suffocating. Ancient cables snaked along peeling walls. The air reeked of mildew and machine oil. Emergency lights flickered overhead as she sprinted to the control room, her boots slapping against the floor. She slammed her hands on the console, typing commands fast and frantic. The flash drive slid into the port. Code began streaming across the screen. Behind her, Sparrow stood guard, pistol raised, scanning the hallway. A burst of automatic fire tore through the corridor. Sparrow shouted and returned fire, covering Silas as he burst in behind her. Blood streaked his side from a grazing shot. He shoved a chair under the door handle and braced it with his shoulder. "Hurry, Leanna!" he gasped, sweat dripping into his eyes. "I'm working on it," she snapped, fingers dancing over keys. "Uploading now, broadcasting over shortwave. Every ham operator out there's going to pick it up and mirror it. It'll spread like wildfire." The tower crackled. Speakers hissed static. A loud pop signaled, a surge, and then a deafening bang. The door exploded inward. Smoke and splinters filled the room. Silhouettes moved through the haze, dark figures in black tactical gear. BFI. Sparrow fired twice before they overwhelmed her. She went down hard, tackled by 2 agents. Through the smoke, a tall figure stepped forward, calm and methodical. Director Halor. His eyes found Silas instantly. Silas stared back, chest heaving, hate radiating from his bloodied face. "You should have stayed loyal, Rock," Halor said, voice quiet, almost kind. He raised his pistol. "Look what you've done. You think you're saving them? You're feeding them lies. Fear is what holds this society together. Without it, we have chaos." Liana screamed from behind the console, voice ragged with pain and hope. "Transmission at 90%. Then the shot came. A sharp, brutal crack. The bullet struck her chest. She stumbled back, gasping, blood blooming through her shirt. She collapsed beside the console, her hand still reaching for the keyboard. Silas roared and raised his weapon, but a shot tore into his shoulder before he could fire. The world spun. He hit the ground hard, blood spreading across the floor. Through blurred vision, he saw Haller step closer, gun leveled. Soldiers pinned Silas down, forcing his cheek to the cold concrete. "You threw it all away," Haller said. Silas's vision dimmed, his ears filled with a dull ringing. Pain pulsed through every inch of his body, but then he saw it, a soft light blinking on the console. Transmission complete. It was done. He smiled faintly. Liana lay still, her breath shallow, her eyes half open. The world would know. Someone out there would hear. Maybe they'd believe, maybe not. But the truth was out now, and no matter what came next, they couldn't take that back. Darkness crept in. Cold fingers of numbness spread through his limbs, and then came the final shot. Everything went black. Morning light spilled over a city in quiet chaos. The skyline looked the same, but something fundamental had changed. Across the globe, media, outlets, both major and obscure, were suddenly flooded with encrypted files bearing the label Project Paragon. Inside were architectural diagrams, confidential memos, internal emails, clear damning evidence that the VX-73 outbreak hadn't been a natural disaster, but a carefully designed crisis. The Unity serum, once hailed as salvation, was exposed as a tool of behavioral control. For a few fragile hours, the world teetered on the edge of something new. Independent broadcasters, citizen journalists, and rogue scientists poured through the files, live streaming their findings. Social media feeds surged with shock, rage, and disbelief. Hashtags trended. Video clips went viral. People cried in their kitchens. People screamed in traffic. For the first time in years, the fog seemed to lift, but the response came swiftly and without mercy. Government spokespeople appeared on every major network within the hour, denouncing the leaks as AI-generated deepfake disinformation. They claimed it was a coordinated attempt by foreign operatives and domestic extremists to derail public health efforts. "We cannot allow fearmongers to hijack truth," one declared. Across major news platforms, many owned by the very corporations implicated in the leak, fact-checking articles appeared within minutes. "The files are fake," they insisted. "Digitally altered. Dangerous." The NSB made an official statement, calling the broadcast a terrorist ploy. The narrative shifted hard. The real danger wasn't what had been revealed. It was who had revealed it. Silas Rock and his co-conspirators were branded as extremists. Screens nationwide flashed with his face beside the slogan, "He lied to protect you." That phrase was everywhere. Bus stops, holo ads, streaming intros. It was slick, chilling, and terrifyingly effective. It suggested that Silas's evidence was not just false, but malicious, a threat to the hard-won order that kept the nation alive. Within hours, any trace of Project Paragon began vanishing from the internet. Posts were deleted, videos removed, accounts suspended or permanently banned. Platforms echoed a single unified message. The NSB is the single source of verified truth. Many, already numbed by months on the Unity serum, barely noticed. Compliance had become a chemical reflex. Protests sparked in a few cities. Brief, chaotic attempts at resistance, but they were silenced just as quickly. Drones dropped canisters of anesthetic gas. Curfews were enforced. Riot teams moved with brutal precision. News coverage labeled them uprisings fueled by hysteria. Still, in the shadows, the files lived on. In encrypted forums, anonymous corners of the dark web, and old-school torrent chains, the documents continued to circulate. A few renegade journalists tried to keep the truth alive, interviewing whistleblowers, hosting streamers who'd witnessed side effects firsthand. But their sites would vanish within hours. Their names disappeared from public databases, replaced by vague warnings. Under investigation for national security threats, some were overwhelmed by bot armies that spammed every comment section with noise, links to porn, fake fact checks, and auto-generated disclaimers. And then, just as quickly as it had begun, the storm faded from the public eye. In a quiet suburban neighborhood, a matte grey government vehicle rolled to a stop in front of a modest home. A woman in a black uniform stepped out, a solemn expression on her face. She carried a folded flag, a sealed envelope, and condolences for Silas Rock's family. He died in a shootout, she told them, while attempting to sabotage a power grid that supports essential medical infrastructure. There was no mention of the bullet fired with director Vance Haylor watching. No mention of Liana Sesh, whose body was found nearby, bloodied and broken. The Bureau of Federal Integrity updated its internal records. Silas Rock, deceased. Status, traitor. And that was it. The world turned, wounded but obedient. New mutations of VX-73 kept surfacing, each followed by minor lockdowns, more surveillance, more fear. Unity Serum was quietly rebranded as Unity Serum Plus, promising better protection, fewer side effects, enhanced civic cooperation. New mandates required every child to be injected on their 5th birthday. Biometric scanners became a way of life. Want to buy groceries? Scan your palm. Access public transit. Retina check. Forget passwords. Your body was your ID now. Privacy became a quaint relic from an older time, like vinyl records or handwritten letters. Yet beneath the silence, small tremors of resistance remained. In the corners of encrypted chat groups, in basements where the windows were always covered, in whispered conversations in crumbling bookstores, people still remembered. They spoke of friends who changed after taking the serum, became quieter, docile, hollow-eyed. They remembered the flash of real horror in the Project Paragon files before they vanished. Some still had fragments saved. Some had memorized lines. They questioned the narrative, even when they were afraid to say so out loud. In a classroom on the edge of a major city, a teacher stood in front of masked children. On the walls were bright posters of smiling cartoon cells and gleaming syringes. The air smelled of sanitizer and order. The teacher picked up a textbook labeled Civic Wellness Curriculum, Level 2, but as she opened it, her eyes drifted to the corner of her desk, where a slip of paper had been slid beneath the edge. It read, in faded ink, "The truth is not a threat. The truth is a seed." And for a split second, she hesitated, then looked up at the children. Behind their masks, their eyes watched her, silent and still. Somewhere, deep inside, a flicker of doubt sparked to life. The classroom was quiet, blanketed in artificial calm. Along the walls hung pristine posters of a future sanitized and serene, each bearing the NSB emblem, an eye within a shield, encircled by the phrase, "Order through unity, safety through silence." The teacher's voice, smooth and gentle like elevator. Music echoed softly through the sterile room. "True citizens do not question the structures that keep us safe," she intoned, tapping a touchscreen embedded in her desk. The wall display shifted to a sleek video montage. Director Haylor in his familiar black overcoat, standing tall before applauding crowds, his image spliced between scenes of emergency response teams, decontamination tents, and families thanking the NSB for saving them from VX-73. At the back of the classroom, A boy named Elias sat unusually still, fingers nervously picking at the edge of his desk. He wasn't watching the video. His eyes had wandered across the room, landing on a forgotten corner of the wall where an old safety poster had begun to curl away from the paint. The image was faded, nearly yellowed from time. It showed a man's face, hard-lined, tired, but not cruel. Below the photo, in bold stencil, "He lied to protect you. Silas Rock." Elias tilted his head. Something about the man's eyes. They didn't look like a liar's. There was no smugness, no contempt, just a fierce, quiet resolve. The kind Elias had only seen in stories the teacher told about approved heroes, the kind that gave their lives for unity. But Silas was never called a hero. He was only mentioned in brief, clinical tones. He spread confusion, he endangered public safety, he chose chaos over cooperation, always followed by a lesson on loyalty and the perils of critical thought. Still, Elias couldn't shake the feeling. Something in his chest tightened, an odd flutter of curiosity. Who was he really? Outside the window, a neat formation of drones hummed past the sky. Their black frames cast quiet shadows across the schoolyard. The world outside was muted, too orderly, too still. Back in the classroom, the teacher's voice softened into a dreamy cadence. National heroes like Director Harlaw remind us that silence is strength, that obedience is compassion, that unity demands sacrifice. Elias blinked. The words slid over his mind like oil over glass. At recess, while the other children formed lines for biometric scans, each child obediently holding out their wrists to be pinged and processed, Elias stepped away. He walked to a corner of the yard where grass still managed to grow, wild and defiant. He crouched there, running his fingers through the blades, letting the sunlight touch his skin. The breeze brushed against his cheek. He closed his eyes. In that moment, he imagined a world different from this one, not one ruled by slogans and silent skies, but one filled with difficult questions, messy truth, and real connection. A world shaped not by compliance, but by courage. The image was fleeting, like smoke dissolving in wind, but it stirred something he didn't yet understand. "Elias!" a voice called sharply. A uniformed safety officer approached, holding up a scanner. Elias stood, extending his wrist as required. The code pinged green. The vision was gone. Far away, buried deep in a government archive warehouse, there sat an unremarkable cardboard box. Dust gathered along its edges. Inside were the final possessions of Silas Rock, his ID tag, a torn blood-stained coat, and one object that no technician had ever bothered to examine. A small encrypted drive, still intact, its metal surface scratched and scuffed. It held data no one had dared open. Files, footage, blueprints, letters, a map of lies, and the last, trace of a man who believed that truth mattered. Years passed. In the shadowed remnants of an old radio relay station high in the mountains, a teenage boy, tall, thin, uncertain, rummaged through a forgotten storage room. He was helping an uncle clear out debris when he stumbled on a crate marked only with the faded initials, SR. Inside, beneath piles of weather-warped papers, he found a battered laptop and a bundle of handwritten notes. The machine still worked, powered by a clunky generator that groaned to life when he flipped the switch. The screen flickered once, then steadied. A single video file blinked into view. The boy stared, hesitated, then clicked. Silas Rock appeared. He looked exhausted, eyes ringed with shadows, jaw tight. But there was something unshakable in his expression. His voice, raspy and steady, cut through the room like a long-forgotten echo. "I don't know who you are. Maybe no one will ever see this. But if you're watching, then somehow, something survived. The official story you've been told about VX-73, about the Unity serum, it's a lie. It wasn't just a vaccine. It was a tool, a